When a mother brings a new man into her children's lives, she's making one of the most important decisions she'll ever make. She's trusting him to protect them, to love them, to be the father figure they need. Children look up to their stepfathers. They call them dad. They trust them completely. But for the victims in these cases, that trust was the deadliest mistake of their short lives. The greatest threat didn't come from a stranger on the street or a monster hiding in the shadows. It came from the man sitting at the dinner table every night, the man tucking them into bed, the man their mothers chose to build a new family with. These weren't accidents or moments of lost temper. These were brutal acts of violence against children who had no way to defend themselves, committed by men who were supposed to keep them safe. And the courts made sure these monsters would never hurt another child again, sentencing them to spend decades or the rest of their lives rotting behind bars. Today we're covering every single stepfather who went from trusted guardian to murderous monster. What you're about to hear will shatter any faith you have in the men who stepped into these families and turned homes into crime scenes, and the innocent children whose lives were stolen by the very people who promised to protect them. Case number 1. Christopher Stockton was a 38-year-old man from Darlington in County Durham, England, who murdered 22-month-old Charlie Roberts. Charlie was the toddler son of Stockton's partner, Paula Roberts. On January 12, 2024, Stockton was left alone with the little boy for less than 20 minutes. In that short time, he inflicted injuries so severe that doctors compared them to the kind of trauma seen in high-speed car crashes. Charlie died the following day. Stockton was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 25 years. To understand how this tragedy happened, we need to go back to early 2023. That was when Christopher Stockton and Paula Roberts first met. According to court testimony, Stockton had recently gone through a divorce. He had a disabled son from his previous marriage. Paula Roberts was a 41-year-old single mother who worked at an indoor climbing centre in Newton Aycliffe, County Durham. She had a baby boy named Charlie Roberts. Charlie had been born 2 months premature and had some difficulty communicating. His father, Barry Greenwell, was described by the prosecution as a loving and caring dad who saw his son once a week. The relationship between Stockton and Roberts developed after a simple transaction. Stockton sold her a car. From there, things moved quickly. By early 2023, they were in a relationship. Stockton first met little Charlie in March 2023, just a few days after the boy celebrated his first birthday. According to Stockton's own testimony at trial, he said meeting Charlie was a new experience for him. He told the jury it was a learning curve being around a child that age. He said a bond between them began to build. He described Charlie as a well-behaved child who would happily play on his own and keep himself busy. But something else was happening during this time. Something darker. Within weeks of Stockton becoming a regular presence in the home, Charlie started showing up with unexplained injuries. In April 2023, just a month after Stockton first met the boy, nursery staff noticed bruises on Charlie's head. The following month, in May 2023, Charlie was taken to Darlington Memorial Hospital. He had bruises across his face. Paula Roberts told the doctors that her son had fallen. Social services got involved. They investigated, but concluded the injuries were accidental. No further action was taken. This was a critical moment, a chance to intervene, a chance to protect a vulnerable child. But the system failed Charlie Roberts. Over the next 9 months, the little boy would suffer injury after injury, and nobody would stop it. Throughout 2023, the relationship between Stockton and Roberts had its ups and downs. By August, things had gotten rocky between them. There were arguments. Stockton was dealing with problems at work and issues with his ex-wife. But despite the tension, Roberts decided to stay with him. She took advice from one of her friends and chose to give the relationship another go. But here is where things take a troubling turn. Around the end of August 2023, Paula Roberts did something that showed she had real concerns about Christopher Stockton. She bought a spy camera. She hid it in a potted plant above Charlie's cot in his bedroom. She told her brother that she was worried about Stockton and wanted to keep an eye on things. Think about that for a moment. This mother was concerned enough about her boyfriend that she felt the need to secretly record what was happening when she left her child alone with him. Yet she stayed in the relationship. She kept leaving Charlie with Stockton, and she never reported her concerns to anyone who could actually do something about it. As the months went on, Charlie continued to get hurt. Photos found on Paula Roberts' phone during the police investigation showed the 22-month-old with bruises and injuries on different parts of his body. The injuries were not the kind that happen when a toddler takes a tumble while learning to walk. Medical experts who examined these photos and the post-mortem evidence later concluded that most of the injuries Charlie sustained would not have been accidental. In December 2023, one of the most disturbing incidents occurred. Stockton took a photograph of Charlie standing in the corner of a room that had been decorated for Christmas. The little boy had been put there because he had been naughty. According to Stockton, Charlie had hit him. A grown man was punishing a 22-month-old child for supposedly hitting him. During this same period, Charlie also suffered a painful injury to the base of his private parts. His mother noticed, but she did nothing. She would later claim in court that she believed the injury was due to a medical condition Charlie had, but medical experts confirmed during the trial that Charlie did not have any such condition. On Boxing Day 2023, less than 3 weeks before Charlie would die, his paternal grandfather Ray Greenwell saw something that shocked him. He noticed a bruise on his grandson's head. He described it as being between the size of a squash ball and a tennis ball. That is a massive bruise on a tiny child. Yet still, nothing was done. In the days leading up to January 12, 2024, the warning signs were flashing red. Charlie had reportedly fallen out of bed and banged his head. He had a bruise by his ear and had been vomiting. These are symptoms that would make any reasonable person think about taking a child to see a doctor. Paula Roberts told Charlie's father, Barry Greenwell, that she planned to take the boy to hospital because of a suspected concussion. She even cancelled Barry's scheduled visit with his son because of this supposed hospital trip. But she never took Charlie to the hospital. She lied to Charlie's father. She also lied to her employer around this time, telling them that Charlie had been admitted to hospital, but he had never been taken in. The day before Charlie was murdered, on January 11, 2024, Paula Roberts noticed that her son had severely bruised ears. She told her brother about it. Her explanation was that Charlie must have hurt himself while sleepwalking. She said he had been found lying down in his toy box. But medical experts who examined the evidence during the trial completely rejected this explanation. Dr. Deborah Stalker was an expert paediatrician and specialist in child protection. She studied photos of Charlie from the months before his death, along with medical reports and post-mortem images. She told the jury that the bruised ear was a non-accidental injury. She said it was a purposefully inflicted injury. She explained that accidental injuries to the ear are very rare. The shoulder or head usually takes the impact when a child falls. To injure an ear in the way Charlie's was injured requires a direct blow. Simple falls do not cause ear injuries. There has to be a direct force to bruise an ear. That does not happen from a domestic tumble, whether a child is awake or asleep. Dr. Stalker dismissed the sleepwalking claim as not plausible. Despite all of this, on the morning of January 12, 2024, Paula Roberts left her injured child in the care of Christopher Stockton and went out for an eye test appointment. The night before had been a typical one for Stockton. He had stayed up until 5:30 in the morning playing Xbox video games and watching television. He set an alarm for 8:30 a.m. He was also recovering from pneumonia, which is why he had not been going to work. He had officially moved into the home on Frosterley Drive in Darlington just 7 days earlier, on January 5, 2024. He moved in to recuperate from his illness. Now he was about to be left alone with a toddler who was already covered in bruises and injuries. Paula Roberts left the house at approximately 8:45 a.m. that Friday morning. She was heading to an optician's appointment in Darlington Town Centre. She left Charlie in the sole care of Christopher Stockton. According to Stockton's own testimony at trial, he had volunteered to look after the boy to make it easier for Roberts. He said he had no problems looking after Charlie, other than being poorly himself. He claimed the toddler was easy to look after. What happened next took less than 20 minutes. Shortly after 9 a.m, Christopher Stockton called 999. He told the emergency operator that Charlie was unable to breathe after choking on something. He said the boy had been playing in a toy tunnel in the living room when he started choking and became lifeless and floppy. He suggested that maybe Charlie had been choking on a biscuit he had been eating earlier. Stockton said he had patted the child on the back and stuck his fingers down the toddler's throat to try to clear any blockage. The 999 call was recorded. Excerpts of it were played to the jury during the trial. On the recording, Stockton could be heard repeatedly saying, "Come on, mate," and "Wakey, wakey," to the little boy, who was not breathing. The call handler talked him through how to perform CPR on the child. At one point during the call, Stockton said he would pass out if he tried to count the compressions he was doing on the toddler. Dr. Mike Davison was part of the air ambulance team that responded to the call. He later gave evidence at trial. He said something that stuck with the jury. He recalled listening to parts of that 999 call and thinking that the caller was incredibly calm. He said that normally when someone is calling emergency services about a child who is not breathing, there is anguish in their voice. But Stockton sounded calm. Paramedics arrived at the scene. When they examined Charlie, they did not find any blockage in his throat. He had not choked on anything, but what they did find was far more sinister. The little boy had a serious head injury. An air ambulance landed on a nearby green at the end of Alexandra Street. Charlie was rushed to the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle. When doctors performed CT scans on the toddler, they found something horrifying. Charlie had suffered major bleeding in his brain. The extent of the internal bleeding was catastrophic. Dr. Victoria Thomas was a consultant at the RVI who treated Charlie when he arrived. She gave evidence at trial. She said that bruising on Charlie's ear and head made the medical team very worried that someone had harmed him. When she saw the results of the brain scan, she made a chilling observation. She told the jury that the only time she could think of seeing a head injury like this was in children who had been in high-speed car accidents. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, there was nothing they could do. Charlie's injuries were unsurvivable. The little boy never regained consciousness. He died the following day, January 13th, 2024. He was 22 months old. He never got to see his second birthday. Dr. Daniel du Plessis was a brain pathologist who examined Charlie's brain after his death. He gave expert testimony at the trial about what he found. He explained that Charlie's brain injury was likely caused by shaking or oscillation. The technical term describes the violent back and forth movement of a child's head. He said that Charlie had sustained a traumatic event that impacted his brain and spinal cord. The injury was so severe that there was no chance of survival. Dr. du Plessis stated that it was impossible for Charlie to have sustained these injuries from a domestic accident. He said there was a third party involved in exposing the child to this trauma. Post-mortem tests found widespread bleeding on Charlie's brain. A separate expert found bleeding within and around his eyes. There was no natural disease that could account for these injuries and findings. They were not the result of a normal bump or fall. The cause of death was the application of severe force to Charlie, causing his head to rotate or be thrown about. Christopher Stockton and Paula Roberts were arrested at the scene on the day Charlie was taken to hospital. The investigation that followed uncovered the disturbing pattern of injuries Charlie had suffered in the months leading up to his death. Police found the photographs on Paula Roberts' phone, showing her son's bruises and injuries over time. They found text messages where she said she would take Charlie to get medical help, but never did. Stockton was charged with murder and child cruelty. The child cruelty charge covered injuries he inflicted on Charlie between May 1st, 2023 and January 14th, 2024. Roberts was charged with child neglect. Both initially denied the charges. The trial took place at Teesside Crown Court starting in November 2024. It lasted several weeks. Nicholas Lumley KC was the lead prosecutor. He laid out the case against Christopher Stockton in clear terms. He told the jury that the prosecution said Christopher Stockton and nobody else was responsible for Charlie's death. He said that Stockton shook or threw the boy with such violence, deliberately and forcefully harming little Charlie. The prosecution argued that after being left in charge of Charlie at 8:45 a.m, Stockton lost his temper within that crucial 20 minutes before his emergency call. In a very short time, because that is all it takes to lose one's temper, he assaulted Charlie by shaking or throwing him with considerable force. The violence was enough to cause catastrophic head injuries. Stockton took the witness stand during the trial. He denied ever harming Charlie. He claimed they had been building a bond together. He said he found Charlie easy to look after. He said the boy had gone floppy and started gasping for air while they were playing. He maintained his story about the choking, but the medical evidence demolished his claims. Expert after expert testified that Charlie could not have been choking. The injuries to his brain were not consistent with choking. They were consistent with being shaken or thrown with extreme force. During the trial, Paula Roberts changed her plea. On December 3rd, 2024, she admitted to child neglect. She pleaded guilty to failing to seek medical help for Charlie in December 2023 and January 2024, after he suffered injuries to his private parts and to his ear. Her defense lawyer, Richard Herman, said she had the wool pulled over her eyes by Stockton. He said she did not believe Stockton was hurting her son, but she admitted that she was at fault for not getting her son medical treatment, regardless of how she believed he had sustained the injuries. Those injuries were described as excruciating. On December 10, 2024, the jury delivered their verdict. They unanimously found Christopher Stockton guilty of murder. They also found him guilty of child cruelty. The case was adjourned for sentencing. Outside the court that day, Charlie's father, Barry Greenwell, released a statement. He said that Charlie was a much-loved son and grandson who had been taken away needlessly and had left the whole family with a void that will never be filled. He said the family was processing the recent events and trying to come to terms with the verdict and information that had been deeply disturbing to them. Detective Superintendent Chris Barker of Durham Constabulary led the investigation. After the verdict, he spoke publicly about the case. He said that Christopher Stockton was entrusted with caring for Charlie on the morning of Friday, January 12th. It was his responsibility to keep Charlie safe. He did not do that. He is the only person who knows exactly what happened that morning, but what we do know is his actions resulted in this little boy's death. The detective also had words about Paula Roberts and her spy camera. He said that to install a spy camera as Paula Roberts did means there must have been concerns about him. If you have concerns about those caring for your children, you must act, speak out, or ask for help. He said Charlie had everything to live for, but his life was cruelly cut short. The sentencing hearing took place on February 7, 2025, at Teesside Crown Court. Mr. Justice Goss presided. He delivered some of the most powerful words of the entire case. The judge described the extent of Charlie's internal bleeding. He said it was typically found in cases of very severe trauma, such as fatal motor vehicle collisions, head crash injuries, or high-level multi-story falls onto concrete. This was the force that Stockton had used against a 22-month-old child. Mr. Justice Goss addressed Stockton directly. He said that no court can undo the harm you have caused. He told Stockton that not only had he deprived a young child who was resilient and exuberant of his life, he had robbed his family of the joy of bringing up a child. He had robbed them of sharing life events with Charlie. The judge noted that during Charlie's short life he had suffered a number of inflicted injuries. The day before he died, he sustained a severe injury to his brain that caused his collapse and death. The jury found Stockton guilty of murder. Jamie Hill KC spoke for the defence. He pointed out that Stockton had no previous convictions. He said the murder was not premeditated and there was no intention to kill. But the judge was unmoved. The level of violence used against a helpless toddler demanded the maximum punishment available under law. Christopher Stockton was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. He also received an 8-year concurrent sentence for child cruelty. He will not be eligible for parole until he is in his 60s at the earliest. The judge then turned to Paula Roberts. Her defence lawyer had argued that she had struggled with mental health issues throughout her life. She wept in the dock as her lawyer said she has to live with the knowledge that had she acted differently, it would not have happened. A safeguarding review later found that Roberts had received support from 26 different agencies over a 5-year period. She had been proactive about accessing mental health support at times, but did not keep up with it. But the judge was clear about where responsibility lay. He said Roberts now claimed that Stockton was controlling and coercive, but he pointed out that she would have been aware of help offered to people in her situation. He told her that she now recognised that she contributed to Charlie's neglect. She had, in effect, turned a blind eye to what she must have known was the reality of the situation. The judge delivered his final words to Paula Roberts. "You remain a risk to any children in your care." She was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. Dominic Tate was the senior Crown prosecutor from CPS Northeast who handled the case. After sentencing, he released a statement. He said it was clear from the evidence that Christopher Stockton's relationship with Charlie Roberts was punctuated by incidents of violence. After Stockton began a relationship with Paula Roberts, Charlie sustained a series of unexplained injuries, culminating in his tragic death in January of last year. Stockton had initially claimed that Charlie died after choking on something that morning, but the CPS worked alongside police partners to show how, while in Stockton's sole care, Charlie was tragically subjected to sufficient violence to cause catastrophic head injuries. Detective Superintendent Chris Barker spoke again after sentencing. His words captured what this case was really about. He said Charlie Roberts was a little boy who just wanted to play. A little boy who just wanted to be loved. A little boy who did not deserve to die. Christopher Stockton's actions are unforgivable, and sadly nothing will bring Charlie back, but at least he is now facing the consequences of what he has done. The detective urged anyone who has concerns about those caring for children to speak out and ask for help. His message was clear: if you see something, say something. A child's life might depend on it. In the weeks following sentencing, both prison terms were referred to the Attorney General's office under the unduly lenient sentence scheme. As of early 2025, both sentences were under consideration and could potentially be referred to the Court of Appeal. If that happens, the cases would be heard in London, where judges would decide whether the sentences should be increased. A safeguarding review was also conducted by the Darlington Safeguarding Partnership. The report highlighted a lack of professional curiosity about Paula Roberts and her partner. It found there had not been enough knowledge or understanding of her mental health difficulties. The report noted that, despite contact with 26 different agencies over 5 years, the system failed to protect Charlie Roberts. Barry Greenwell, Charlie's father, had written a victim impact statement for the court, along with both of Charlie's grandfathers. All 3 men chose not to have their statements read out publicly. Some grief is too private to share, but Barry's brief public words told everyone what they needed to know. His son was much loved. He was always smiling, always laughing, always walking around. He was taken needlessly, and the void left behind will never be filled. Charlie Roberts was failed by the people who were supposed to protect him. His mother prioritized her relationship over his safety. She saw the warning signs and chose to ignore them. She bought a spy camera because she was worried, but never acted on what she knew. She watched her son accumulate injury after injury and made excuses instead of seeking help. Christopher Stockton came into this child's life as a trusted figure. Paula Roberts wanted Charlie to call him Daddy. Instead, Stockton became a monster. He was intermittently cruel and violent toward Charlie during the boy's short life. He concealed his actions by blaming accidental falls or natural events, and on one terrible January morning, he lost control completely. In less than 20 minutes, he destroyed a life that had barely begun. The medical experts were unanimous. The injuries that killed Charlie Roberts were not accidents. They were not caused by choking on a biscuit. They were not the result of a toddler's tumble. They were inflicted deliberately, with extreme violence, by a grown man against a defenseless 22-month-old child. Now Christopher Stockton will spend at least the next 25 years behind bars. Paula Roberts will serve 4 years, knowing her choices contributed to her son's death. The judge told her she remains a risk to any children in her care. And Charlie Roberts, the little boy who was always smiling and always laughing, will never get to grow up. He will never go to school. He will never make friends. He will never fall in love. He will never have a life, because the man his mother trusted to care for him chose violence instead. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 2. Case number 2. Craig Crouch was a 39-year-old man from Moira, near Swadlincote in England, who murdered his 10-month-old stepson Jacob Crouch. Jacob died on December 30th, 2020, after months of brutal abuse at the hands of his stepfather. The little boy had suffered up to 41 broken ribs, 19 visible bruises, and internal injuries that medical experts compared to the kind of trauma seen in high-speed car crashes. Craig Crouch was convicted of murder and 3 counts of child cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years before he can apply for parole. To understand how this horror came to pass, we need to go back to September 2019. That was when Craig Crouch and Gemma Barton first connected. They met on a dating website called Plenty of Fish. At the time, Barton was 32 years old and 4 months pregnant with a baby boy. The father of that unborn child was a man named Andrew Smith. But Andrew Smith would never get to meet his son. By the time the baby was born, Crouch had already inserted himself into the picture and taken over. Crouch was a forklift driver who worked at the JCB plant in Uttoxeter, Staffordshire. But that was not how he presented himself to Gemma Barton. From the very start of their relationship, Crouch told lie after lie to impress her. He claimed he was the acting director at JCB, while the company's CEO was running a sister company. He told her he ran the entire operation. He bragged about flying in a private helicopter owned by the company to travel to London for business meetings. He wrote to her saying he was waiting for the bird now, referring to the helicopter. The lies kept coming. Crouch claimed he was a fully qualified sports therapist who used to work with high-profile footballers, gymnasts, and stars. He said he stopped doing massage therapy because he became too high in demand. He boasted about having a 6-figure salary. He told Barton about a supposed rare heart condition that required him to consume 5,000 calories a day. He claimed his adrenaline was so high that he had a ridiculously high sex drive and needed to sort himself out 4 times a day. He also promised her material things. Just weeks after meeting her, Crouch sent Barton a link to a car for sale. He told her he was buying it for her as a gift. He showed her lists of Audi cars and told her to pick one, but none of the vehicles ever materialised. There was always some excuse. The test drives went poorly, the cars had problems, the gifts never came. Despite all the lies, Barton fell for Crouch hard and fast. They became very close very quickly. Within just a month of first contacting Barton, Crouch was already calling her unborn baby our little boy. In October 2019, when Barton showed him a photo of the baby's ultrasound scan, Crouch texted her, saying he wanted to be there to hold her hand and support her. He wrote that he would be by her side 10,000%. Crouch moved in with Barton just a few months after they met. He convinced her to relocate from her family and friends in the Amber Valley area to South Derbyshire. This isolation would prove to be a key part of the tragedy that followed. Barton was cut off from her support network, alone with a man who was domineering, aggressive, boastful, and arrogant. Those were the words the judge would later use to describe Craig Crouch. Jacob Crouch was born on February 17, 2020. He was born healthy. Craig Crouch was named as the father on the birth certificate, even though he had no biological connection to the child. He was listed as Jacob's father at Crouch's insistence. Crouch later testified that he was honoured to have his name on the certificate. He said he was very emotional at the time and asked Barton if she was sure. According to Crouch, Barton told him she could not have asked for somebody better. But beneath the surface of this seemingly happy new family, something dark was growing. Within months of Jacob's birth, the abuse began. According to prosecutors, Jacob was assaulted, causing bruising on a regular basis, for at least 6 months, from the age of just 4 months old. That means the violence started as early as June 2020, when Jacob was barely a newborn infant. The evidence of what happened inside that house came from an unlikely source. Text messages. Thousands of text messages between Craig Crouch and Gemma Barton painted a horrifying picture of the culture of cruelty that Jacob was forced to endure. The prosecution read many of these messages to the jury at Derby Crown Court during the 7-week trial. On June 2, 2020, when Jacob was less than 4 months old, Barton texted Crouch with a complaint about her baby. She wrote, "If only you could talk to Jacob and tell him to stop his bloody moaning." This was a mother expressing frustration at her infant son for crying. Babies cry. That is what they do. But in this household, crying was treated as a punishable offence. Later that same month, Crouch sent a text to Barton asking a disturbing question. He asked whether she had put back what Jacob threw back down him. He was talking about vomit. He was asking if Barton had forced her baby to eat his own vomit. Barton confirmed that she had. A 4-month-old baby was being made to consume his own vomit as a form of punishment or control. The messages got worse as time went on. Crouch told Barton she needed to be more regimental with Jacob. He instructed her that if Jacob started crying for no reason, she should smack his hand or put him to bed. Remember, this was an infant. Babies cry because they need something. They are hungry. They are tired. They are uncomfortable. They have no other way to communicate. But Crouch saw Jacob's crying as defiance that needed to be crushed. In one text message, Jacob was referred to as the devil by the couple. This was how they talked about a helpless baby, their own child, or in Crouch's case, his stepchild. They called him the devil for doing nothing more than being a baby. In September 2020, when Jacob was about 7 months old, Crouch sent another chilling text. Barton had told him she was bathing Jacob. Crouch replied with the words, 3 foot deep, just hot water and some bleach, followed by kisses. When police later questioned Crouch about this message, he dismissed it as banter. But there was nothing funny about the context. This was a man who was regularly assaulting a baby, joking about drowning him in bleach water. Around the same time, Crouch sent more texts expressing his growing hatred for the child. He wrote that Jacob was pushing us to our limits. He said he was starting to get really pissed off with him. This anger toward a baby would soon escalate into deadly violence. Police also found audio notes that Crouch had sent to Barton. In these recordings, Crouch explained his warped view on parenting. He talked about how families needed a defined hierarchy, with the parents at the top. He compared it to a workplace. He said you would never have 2 managers or 2 directors over the same people earning the same money. There had to be a chain of command. This was how Crouch justified his control over the household and his domination over a helpless infant. The physical evidence of abuse started appearing early. In May 2020, when Jacob was just 3 months old, blood staining was found on a Moses basket sheet. Crouch was asked about this during cross-examination at trial. He said he physically could not work out where the blood had come from. Images shown to the jury revealed bruising on Jacob's chest as early as July 2020. Medical experts said these bruises were consistent with forceful compression of the ribs. Someone was squeezing this baby with enough force to leave marks. On September 8, 2020, when Jacob was 7 months old, a health visitor came to the home. During this visit, Barton pointed out a bruise on Jacob's cheek. She claimed he had done it himself while playing with a toy. She also complained to the health visitor that Jacob was becoming too clingy. The health visitor told her this was normal. 7-month-old babies like to be held. It shows good attachment. The health visitor did not see the danger that Jacob was in. This was a crucial missed opportunity. A professional had been inside the home. They had seen a bruise on the baby's face, but they accepted the explanation they were given and moved on. Jacob remained trapped in that house with his abusers. The abuse continued and intensified through the autumn of 2020. The prosecution later told the court that there were at least 15 separate incidents of bruising documented on Jacob's body. Some of these incidents occurred while Crouch was at work, meaning Barton was also capable of violence against her own child. But the most severe injuries came from Crouch. Post-mortem examinations would later reveal that Jacob had suffered up to 41 broken ribs. These fractures were caused by being squeezed with serious force on at least 5 separate occasions over many months. The medical evidence showed that some fractures had healed and then been re-broken by further assaults. This meant that Jacob's ribs had been broken, allowed to partially heal, and then broken again. The pain this child must have endured is impossible to imagine. 22 of those rib fractures occurred in the last week of Jacob's life. The prosecutor, Mary Pryor KC, told the jury that each fracturing event required sustained, significant force by adult hands. These were not accidental injuries. They could only have been caused by deliberate violence. Despite all of this, neither Crouch nor Barton ever sought medical help for Jacob. They never took him to a doctor. They never called for an ambulance. They never told anyone about the injuries. Instead, they continued the abuse in secret, while presenting themselves to the outside world as loving parents. The fatal assault came in late December 2020. The prosecution said Jacob was kicked or stamped on with such severe force that it fractured a rib and caused a tear in his stomach and bowel. This single act of violence ruptured the baby's internal organs. Dr. Michael Biggs was the forensic pathologist who examined Jacob's body. He told the court that blunt force trauma was the only plausible explanation for Jacob's death. The injury that killed him could only have been sustained through a punch, kick, or stamp. Dr. Biggs said he would expect to see such injuries in car crash victims or those who had suffered a multi-story fall. The force used against this 10-month-old baby was comparable to being hit by a car. The ruptured bowel caused an infection called peritonitis. This is a serious condition where the lining of the abdominal organs becomes inflamed and infected due to bacteria leaking from the damaged intestines. It is extremely painful. It causes fever, vomiting, and severe abdominal pain. Without immediate medical treatment, it is fatal. Jacob lay dying in that house, while his mother and stepfather did nothing. The court heard that Jacob would have suffered serious pain in the hours leading up to his death. This pain would have been clear to anyone caring for him. He would have been systematically unwell. He would have been crying, feverish, unable to feed properly. But Crouch and Barton ignored all of these signs. The most tragic aspect of this case, as the prosecutor noted, was that if either of these parents had gone for medical help, Jacob would have lived. Peritonitis is treatable if caught in time. Emergency surgery can repair the damage and antibiotics can fight the infection. But neither Crouch nor Barton called for help. They let their baby die rather than face questions about how he got injured. On the evening of December 29th, 2020, the night before Jacob died, the baby was reportedly unwilling to take a bottle. This was almost certainly because he was in severe pain from his internal injuries. His body was failing. But Crouch and Barton later told doctors that other than this small issue, Jacob was otherwise fine. At some point during that night, Jacob died. He died alone in his cot. He died in pain. He died without anyone coming to help him. The lies began immediately. On the morning of December 30th, 2020, Crouch called 999. He calmly reported that they had found Jacob unresponsive in his cot at around 7 a.m. In the 999 call, Crouch claimed that Jacob was fine just 2 hours before. He said there was nothing out of the ordinary in the days and hours before Jacob died. But the medical evidence told a different story. When paramedics arrived at the couple's home in Foxley Chase in Linton near Swadlincote, they found something disturbing. Jacob had clear bruising visible on his body. There were also signs of rigor mortis. This meant the baby had been dead for much longer than Crouch and Barton claimed. Jacob was probably already dead or dying when Barton claimed to have checked on him at 5 a.m. Jacob was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics from the East Midlands Ambulance Service. His body was taken to the Royal Derby Hospital, where doctors examined him and questioned the parents about his condition before death. Crouch and Barton stuck to their story. They said Jacob was a happy, healthy baby who had simply stopped breathing overnight for no reason. The post-mortem examination revealed the truth. Jacob had 39 rib fractures. He had 19 visible bruises. He had multiple internal bruises and bleeds. He had evidence of severe and significant blunt force trauma to his abdomen. His bowel had been ruptured. He had died from peritonitis caused by that traumatic bowel injury. There was no natural disease that could account for any of this. Jacob Crouch had been murdered. Craig Crouch and Gemma Barton were arrested on January 5, 2021. Police released body-worn camera footage of the arrests. In the video, Barton can be heard crying and pleading with officers. She says, "I did not do anything," over and over again. She sobs, "My baby," as her speech becomes distorted with tears. Crouch's arrest was very different. He remained calm. He told officers they did not need to put handcuffs on him. This was the same man who had calmly called 999 while his stepson lay dead. The same man who had spent months texting about punishing a baby for crying. He showed no emotion. Both defendants were charged with murder, causing or allowing the death of a child, causing a child to suffer serious physical harm, and 3 counts of child cruelty. Both denied all charges. They continued to deny everything throughout the investigation and into the trial. The trial began at Derby Crown Court in June 2023. It lasted 7 weeks. The prosecution was led by Mary Pryor, KC. She laid out the case against the couple in devastating detail. She told the jury that these 2 parents created an environment in which they encouraged and applauded each other in their control and punishments of this little baby. Neither of them, in this very small house where no one could be alone, could have committed these offences without the knowledge and assistance of the other. She described what Jacob endured as a culture of cruelty. She said he died from a vicious assault. She explained that neither parent ever sought medical help for Jacob at any stage for the pain and suffering caused when his bones were broken or in the few days that followed. She noted the most heartbreaking fact of all. Neither got Jacob out of what must have been a life with episodes of significant pain and suffering. Jacob was not given the care that as a baby he needed and deserved. The trial heard from multiple medical experts. Dr. Sarah Dixon was a consultant paediatrician who gave evidence about Jacob's injuries. She told the court that Jacob was the victim of repeated physical abuse. She said it was not remotely possible that the injuries could have been self-inflicted. When Crouch's lawyer suggested that perhaps Jacob had hurt himself, Dr. Dixon dismissed this completely. The defense tried various tactics. Crouch took the witness stand and claimed he loved children. He said he was honoured to be named on Jacob's birth certificate. He said he supported Jacob from the start. He said he would regularly cuddle with Jacob and help with feeds and bathing. He said he was one for taking selfies with his stepson. When asked if he had any ill feelings toward Jacob, Crouch said no. He described Jacob as a well-behaved child who would keep himself busy. He denied any knowledge of how Jacob's injuries were caused. He suggested they might have been self-inflicted. Barton also gave evidence. She broke down in tears on the witness stand. When her lawyer asked who could have killed Jacob, she replied through her sobs that it was not me, so that leaves Craig. She said she never punched, kicked, or jumped on Jacob. She said she did not see Crouch hurt him either, but she admitted to tapping Jacob's bottom when he misbehaved. The jury did not believe either of them. After 4 full days of deliberation, they returned their verdicts on August 2, 2023. Craig Crouch was found guilty of murder and 3 counts of child cruelty. Gemma Barton was cleared of murder and manslaughter, but she was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child and 1 count of child cruelty. The sentencing hearing took place on August 4, 2023. Mr. Justice Kerr delivered powerful remarks as he sent Crouch to prison for the rest of his useful life. The judge acknowledged something unusual about this case. He said Crouch was in some ways an unlikely murderer. This was because Crouch had no previous criminal convictions. He seemed, on the surface, to be a normal man. But the judge saw through this facade. He described Crouch as domineering, aggressive, boastful, and arrogant. He said Crouch had caused Jacob intense and prolonged harm. He noted that this was an abuse of trust of the most gross kind. Over 7 months, Crouch had inflicted bruising and then fractured ribs on this little baby. The judge spoke about Jacob himself. He said Jacob was a happy, smiley, bubbly baby who never complained about the horrific treatment he was receiving. He had to put up with it, and he did, often with a smile. Even those who never knew Jacob personally will miss him. Mr. Justice Kerr addressed Crouch directly. He said, "You caused Jacob acute physical and mental suffering. You inflicted first bruising and then fractured ribs on this little baby. You have not shown any remorse for what you did." He noted that Crouch had offered no explanation and no apology for his crimes. Craig Crouch was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years. He will not be eligible to apply for parole until he is in his late 60s. He remained silent throughout the hearing, showing no emotion. Gemma Barton was also sentenced by the judge. Mr. Justice Kerr acknowledged that she had been coerced and controlled by Crouch. Her defence lawyer, Clive Stockwell KC, had argued that she was effectively isolated by her partner. He said the evidence supported the fact that Barton was coerced and controlled by Crouch at all material times. But the judge was clear that this did not excuse her actions. He said Barton had shown misplaced affection for Crouch. He noted that she now claimed Crouch was controlling and coercive, but she would have been aware of help available for people in her situation. She chose not to seek it. She chose to stay with Crouch. She chose her relationship over her son's safety. Barton was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She wept in the dock as the sentence was read. Members of the public gallery also cried. The contrast with Crouch's silent stoicism was striking. Jacob's biological father, Andrew Smith, had written a victim personal statement that was read out in court. Andrew never got to meet his son. By the time Jacob was born, Crouch had already taken over. Andrew was shut out of his child's life, and then his child was murdered. In his statement, Andrew said, "The pain will be with me for a lifetime. It will never go away." He addressed Crouch directly. He said, "I cannot understand how or why you could inflict the injuries you did, Craig. My boy has some justice now, but it will never be enough for his suffering." Detective Inspector Paul Bullock of the East Midlands Special Operations Unit spoke after the sentencing. He said Jacob Crouch was born into a culture of cruelty, where both of the people who he should have been able to trust above any other allowed him to be subjected to assault after assault. He said it was heartbreaking that for much of Jacob's short life, he would have been in significant pain as a result of the serious, repeated assaults. He noted that the evidence found on Crouch and Barton's phones, through text messages, videos, and audio recordings, showed they were equally responsible for the culture of cruelty inflicted on baby Jacob. The detective spoke as a father himself. He said he could not comprehend what happened in that house. His thoughts remained with Jacob's wider family, who were left devastated by his death. The NSPCC also released a statement after the sentencing. They said the trial revealed shocking and deeply upsetting details of child abuse. Jacob's short life was marked by sustained cruelty and violence. Their hearts went out to his wider family and the community where this terrible crime took place. The NSPCC noted something important about the timing of Jacob's death. He was one of 36 children who died in England following abuse and maltreatment at home in 2020. That year was dominated by COVID-19 lockdowns. For large parts of the year, children were cut off from their usual support systems and the wider community. This made those at risk of abuse more vulnerable to serious harm. Jacob died during that period of isolation. He spent his entire short life in lockdown. He never got to go to nursery where teachers might have noticed his injuries. He never got to play with other children whose parents might have seen something wrong. He was trapped in that house with his abusers, hidden from the world. After the sentencing, both prison terms were referred to the Attorney General's office under the unduly lenient sentence scheme. This is a process where members of the public can ask for a sentence to be reviewed if they think it is too low. Both Crouch's 28-year minimum and Barton's 10-year sentence were considered. In September 2023, the Solicitor General concluded that the sentences could not properly be referred to the Court of Appeal. A spokesman said the Solicitor General was deeply saddened and appalled by this case, but the test as to whether a sentence was unduly lenient was not met. The sentences would stand. But Crouch was not done fighting. In November 2023, it was confirmed that he had filed an application for leave to appeal against both his conviction and his sentence. The Judicial Office confirmed he had lodged the paperwork. His case would be heard at the Court of Appeal in London at a date yet to be determined. This appeal meant that Crouch was still trying to escape justice for what he did to Jacob. He still would not accept responsibility. He still showed no remorse. Just as the judge had observed at sentencing, Crouch offered no explanation and no apology. He continued to deny everything. Jacob Crouch lived for just 10 months. He was born into a world where the two people responsible for his care instead chose to hurt him. He suffered broken bones, bruises, and internal injuries. He was squeezed until his ribs cracked. He was kicked or stamped on until his bowel ruptured. He was made to eat his own vomit. He was smacked for crying. He was called the devil by his own mother and stepfather. And through it all, according to everyone who knew him, Jacob remained a happy, smiley, bubbly baby. He never complained about the horrific treatment he was receiving. He had to put up with it, and he did, often with a smile. Those words from the judge capture something both beautiful and devastating about Jacob Crouch. Even in the worst circumstances imaginable, he found reasons to smile. Craig Crouch took that smile away forever. He killed a baby who had done nothing wrong except exist. He murdered a child who trusted him completely. He destroyed a life that had barely begun. Now Crouch will spend at least the next 28 years behind bars. He will be an old man before he can even apply for release. And even then, there is no guarantee the parole board will let him out. He may die in prison. That would be fitting. Jacob died alone in his cot. Crouch deserves to die alone in his cell. Gemma Barton faces a different kind of punishment. She will spend 10 years in prison, but she will also spend the rest of her life knowing that her choices contributed to her son's death. As her lawyer said in court, she has to live with the knowledge that had she acted differently, it would not have happened. That is a very significant cross to bear for the rest of her life. The judge was right to hold her accountable. Yes, she was controlled by Crouch. Yes, she was isolated from her family. But she was an adult. She had options. She could have left. She could have called for help. She could have taken Jacob to a doctor. She could have told a health visitor the truth about those bruises. She chose not to do any of those things. Instead, she chose Craig Crouch. She chose her relationship over her son's life. And now her son is dead because of it. Jacob Crouch deserved better. He deserved parents who loved him unconditionally. He deserved a home where he felt safe. He deserved to grow up, go to school, make friends, and live a full life. He deserved the chance to stop smiling because of resilience and start smiling because of joy. He got none of those things. He got Craig Crouch instead. A liar, a manipulator, a bully, and a murderer. A man who saw a baby as the devil. A man who joked about bathing a child in bleach. A man who squeezed a tiny body until the bones broke. A man who kicked or stamped on a helpless infant until his organs ruptured. That man is now where he belongs, behind bars. For at least 28 years, for the murder of Jacob Crouch. A baby who deserved so much better. A baby who will never be forgotten. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 3. Case number 3. Elvis Lee was a 34-year-old man from the Paston area of Peterborough, England, who murdered his 5-year-old stepson Tyler Whelan. Tyler died in hospital on March 7, 2011, after collapsing at the family home. His death came after months of abuse and multiple hospital admissions that should have raised red flags, but did not lead to any meaningful intervention. Elvis Lee was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17.5 years. He will not be able to apply for parole until he has served that time. Tyler Whelan was just a little boy. He was 5 years old when he died. His father, Sean Harrison, later described him as a fun-loving, mischievous little boy with a big heart and amazing smile. Tyler deserved a happy childhood. Instead, he got Elvis Lee. Tyler's mother was Stephanie Whelan. She was 27 years old at the time of the trial and originally came from Wigan in the north of England. At some point, she moved to the Peterborough area and ended up living in the Paston neighbourhood with her son. That was where she met Elvis Lee. Lee lived nearby in an area called Crabtree, also in Paston. He became Stephanie Whelan's boyfriend and eventually moved into the family home at Sheepwalk in Paston. From that point on, he lived under the same roof as little Tyler. Elvis Lee was not a good man. He had a long criminal history stretching back years. By the time of Tyler's murder trial, the court heard that Lee had 56 previous offences on his record. These included dishonesty, affray, and violence. He was a man who had been in trouble with the law over and over again throughout his adult life. Most importantly, Lee had previous convictions for domestic abuse. He had been violent toward a previous partner before he ever met Stephanie Whelan. Because of those convictions, Lee had been ordered by the courts to take part in a domestic violence program. This was supposed to help him control his anger and stop him from hurting women. It did not work. Even after starting his relationship with Stephanie Whelan, Lee's violence continued. Police had been alerted to alleged attacks by Lee on Whelan herself. Officers knew that he was hurting his girlfriend, but Lee was never convicted over these allegations. He remained free, living in that house with Stephanie and her young son Tyler. Neighbours also noticed problems. At least one neighbour reported child safety concerns before Tyler's death. They could see that something was wrong in that household, but nothing was done. Tyler stayed in that home with his mother and her violent boyfriend. The abuse of Tyler Whelan did not start with the attack that killed him. There was a pattern of injuries going back many months. Tyler had been hurt repeatedly, and several of those injuries were serious enough to send him to hospital. In 2010, Tyler broke his leg. This was a significant injury for such a young child. His mother took him to hospital, but not right away. She waited until the day after the injury occurred before seeking medical help. Doctors were concerned about this delay. Why would a mother wait a full day before taking her child with a broken leg to get treatment? Doctors were also concerned about bruises they saw on Tyler's body during this hospital visit. The broken leg was not the only mark on him. There were other signs that something was wrong. When asked to explain the broken leg, Stephanie Whelan told doctors that Tyler had fallen on the stairs. This was a plausible explanation. Children do fall on stairs and break bones. The doctors examined the injury and concluded that a broken leg was consistent with a fall on the stairs. They could not prove otherwise. But the concerns were serious enough that social services were contacted. In June 2010, doctors reported their worries to Children's Social Care. A meeting was called between police, Children's Social Care, and the probation service to discuss Tyler's case. These were all the agencies that should have been able to protect a vulnerable child. Tyler was allowed to go home. No further action was taken. The professionals looked at the situation and decided that there was not enough evidence to intervene. Tyler went back to live with his mother and Elvis Lee. This was a catastrophic mistake. A child had shown up at hospital with a broken leg and other bruises. His mother had waited a day before seeking treatment. Her boyfriend was a convicted domestic abuser with 56 previous offences who was known to police for violence, and the system decided to do nothing. There was another incident involving Tyler that should have raised alarms. At some point, Tyler suffered injuries to his genitals. His mother claimed this happened while he was playing with a toy. This explanation was accepted, and again, no serious action was taken. The serious case review that was conducted after Tyler's death would later find that these incidents were seen in isolation. There were minimal attempts to link concerning patterns of injuries. Each time Tyler showed up hurt, the professionals treated it as a separate event rather than looking at the bigger picture. If they had connected the dots, they might have seen that this child was being repeatedly injured in ways that did not add up. The review found numerous missed opportunities to help Tyler. It stated that there was no real understanding of what life at home was like for him. Most damning of all, the review noted that no professional ever saw Tyler in his family home, not once. Social workers never visited the house where Lee lived with Tyler and his mother. They never saw with their own eyes how this child was living. The review was written by Ron Locke, a former regional head of child protection services at the NSPCC. He commented that child protection procedures were not followed on several occasions. Established processes like strategy meetings were sometimes dealt with in an ad hoc way. Interagency communication was described as incredibly poor. Social work assessments were deemed very poor and below basic procedural requirements. The system that was supposed to protect Tyler failed him at every turn. Core assessments that should have been carried out by a social worker after Tyler's hospital visits were never completed. On one occasion, there was no clear reason why the work was not undertaken. The allocated social worker simply left her employment soon after, and nobody picked up where she left off. Tyler's father, Sean Harrison, was never informed about any of these concerns. He did not know that doctors had raised alarms about his son's injuries. He did not know that meetings had been held to discuss Tyler's safety. He was completely in the dark. By the time he learned the truth, it was too late. Peterborough City Council's Children's Services Department was already under pressure at this time. In June 2010, the same month that Tyler's broken leg was reported, Ofsted had given the department a notice to improve. The inspectors had identified serious problems with how children were being protected in the area, but those problems were not fixed in time to save Tyler Whelan. The fatal attack came in March 2011. By this point, Tyler had been admitted to hospital multiple times with injuries. The trial would later hear that his death came after his fourth admission to hospital with blunt force traumas. 4 times this little boy had been brought to hospital badly hurt, and 4 times the system had failed to remove him from danger. On the day of the final assault, something set Elvis Lee off. According to Lee's own testimony at trial, he found Tyler crouching behind an armchair in the house. What Tyler was doing there, and why that made Lee angry, was never fully explained. Lee admitted that he bit Tyler on the leg. He sank his teeth into the flesh of a 5-year-old child. Tyler tried to pull away from the pain. Lee then picked Tyler up and placed him on the armchair, but Tyler fell off. That was when Lee lost control completely. He admitted that he was really angry. He kicked Tyler. The little boy's left side hit a door and the door frame. The impact was devastating. Lee told the court that he knew Tyler was winded because the child stuttered and made a gasping sound. Those were the sounds of a 5-year-old boy whose internal organs had just been ruptured by the force of his stepfather's kick. Tyler could not breathe properly. He could not speak properly. He was dying. Tyler collapsed at the family home in Sheepwalk. An ambulance was called and he was rushed to hospital. But the damage was too severe. Tyler Whelan died in hospital on March 7, 2011. He was just 5 years old. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and abdomen. The kick that Lee admitted to delivering had caused catastrophic internal injuries. Tyler's small body simply could not survive that level of violence. When medical professionals examined Tyler's body after his death, they found a horrifying catalogue of injuries. He had 18 injuries to his face and neck. He had 17 injuries to his body. He had 10 injuries to his arms and hands. He had 13 injuries to his legs. Among those leg injuries was a human bite mark, the wound that Lee had inflicted by biting Tyler during the final assault. That adds up to 58 separate injuries on the body of a 5-year-old child. Some of these injuries were old, some were new. All of them told the story of a boy who had been beaten repeatedly over an extended period of time. Tyler had been suffering for months, and nobody had saved him. Elvis Lee and Stephanie Whelan were both arrested and charged. Lee was charged with murder. Whelan was charged with causing or allowing the death of a child. Both defendants denied the charges against them. They both also faced additional charges of cruelty or neglect, relating to their failure to seek medical treatment for Tyler's earlier injuries. The trial took place at Cambridge Crown Court. The prosecutor was Christopher Donlan. He told the jury that Tyler had suffered non-accidental injuries, including a broken leg in the year leading up to his death. He laid out the evidence of the repeated abuse that Tyler had endured. Lee's defense was that he never intended to kill or seriously hurt Tyler. He admitted that he had kicked and bitten the child, but he claimed he did not mean to cause such severe harm. His lawyers argued that this made him guilty of manslaughter, not murder. Manslaughter carries a lesser sentence than murder. Stephanie Whelan's reaction when she learned what had happened was read out in court. She said she thought her son had died of normal circumstances at first. She did not immediately suspect Lee. In a statement, She said, "If he is the one that hurt my baby, I want him dead." She described Tyler as so special and called him her rock. Whelan expressed confusion about how Lee could have done this. She pointed out that all week Elvis has been comforting me over my loss. How can he comfort me if he did it? She said she fell in love with this man and that they were the only ones in the house with Tyler. She claimed he was always so nice to the kids and asked, why would he hurt my baby? But the evidence told a different story. Lee was not nice to Tyler. He had been hurting the boy for months, and Stephanie Whelan had allowed it to happen, whether through active participation or through willful blindness to what was going on under her own roof. The trial lasted several weeks. Elvis Lee took the witness stand to give his version of events. He described finding Tyler behind the armchair, biting him, and then kicking him after Tyler fell off the sofa. He claimed he never intended to cause serious injury. Stephanie Whelan cried loudly during Lee's evidence. She was so distressed that she had to be led away from the dock. Whether her tears were for Tyler, for herself, or for the man she had loved, only she knows. The jury deliberated for almost 11 hours. That is a long time to be locked in a room deciding whether someone is a murderer. The length of the deliberation showed that at least some jurors took seriously Lee's claim that he did not intend to kill Tyler. But in the end, the jury decided that Lee had intended to either kill or seriously harm Tyler when he kicked him. They found him guilty of murder. Stephanie Whelan was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child. She was not convicted of murder, but she was held responsible for failing to protect her son. Both defendants were cleared of 2 counts of cruelty or neglect relating to their failure to seek medical advice on a previous occasion when Tyler was injured. They were also found not guilty of 3 counts of child cruelty. The jury decided there was not enough evidence to convict them on those specific charges, even though Tyler had clearly suffered extensive abuse. The verdicts came down on Monday, May 14, 2012. Elvis Lee was taken back to custody to await sentencing the next day. Stephanie Whelan was also remanded in custody, with her sentencing scheduled for June. The sentencing hearing for Elvis Lee took place on Tuesday, May 15, 2012, at Cambridge Crown Court. The judge was Mr. Justice Nichol. He had listened to all the evidence during the trial and now had the task of deciding how long Lee should spend in prison. Before passing sentence, Mr. Justice Nichol addressed Lee directly. He spoke about the vulnerability of Tyler Whelan. He said Tyler was particularly vulnerable because of his age. Then he delivered a line that captured the horror of what Lee had done. He said to Lee, "He was half your height and a quarter of your weight." Think about that for a moment. Elvis Lee was a grown man. Tyler Whelan was a small 5-year-old boy. Lee was twice as tall as Tyler. Lee weighed 4 times as much as Tyler. This was not a fair fight. This was not even a fight at all. It was a grown man attacking a tiny child who had no chance of defending himself. The judge also expressed his suspicion that Lee had done more than he admitted to. He said, "I entertain the suspicion you inflicted more blows than you have admitted, and that may be the reason Tyler said nothing to his mother." This was a significant statement. The judge believed that Lee had hit Tyler so many times and terrorized him so completely that the child was too afraid to tell his own mother what was happening. Tyler was being beaten by his stepfather, and he kept quiet about it. Maybe he thought his mother would not believe him. Maybe he thought Lee would hurt him worse if he told. Maybe he had tried to tell and been ignored. Whatever the reason, Tyler suffered in silence while the adults around him failed to protect him. Mr. Justice Nichol sentenced Elvis Lee to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17.5 years. This meant Lee would have to serve at least 17 years and 6 months in prison before he could even apply for parole. Given that he was 34 at the time of sentencing, Lee would be in his 50s before he had any chance of release. Superintendent Simon Medjicks of Cambridgeshire Police spoke after the verdict and sentence. He did not hold back in his description of Elvis Lee. He called it a wicked crime, in which an innocent 5-year-old was murdered by a person who should have been looking after him. Medjicks described Lee as a controlling and violent man who lost his temper and inflicted fatal injuries to Tyler. He noted that Whelan had been found to have allowed Tyler's death following these fatal injuries. Then he delivered a verdict on Tyler's mother that many people shared. He said, Tyler deserved more from his mother. The superintendent stated a basic truth that should not need stating, but apparently does. He said, every child has the right to be protected and feel safe in their own home. He added that it is a parent's responsibility to ensure this is the case. Stephanie Whelan was sentenced separately in June 2012. She received 4 years in prison for causing or allowing the death of her child. This was a much shorter sentence than Lee received, reflecting the fact that she was not the one who physically killed Tyler, but she was held accountable for her failure to protect him. Tyler's father, Sean Harrison, released a tribute to his son after the verdict. His words were heartbreaking. He said, "The last year of my life has been unbearable." He described Tyler as a fun-loving, mischievous little boy with a big heart and amazing smile. Harrison expressed the pain of a father who would never see his child grow up. He said, "I feel lost without him in my life, and I still cannot believe he is gone." He spoke of the future that Tyler would never have. He said, "It hurts me that I will never get the chance to see him grow up and see the man he should have become." In a show of remarkable grace, Harrison said he had no malice toward the families of Lee or Whelan. He recognized that the guilt belonged to the individuals, not their relatives. He said Whelan and Lee are responsible for Tyler's death, not their families. Harrison asked for peace. He said the trial is over and the jury has reached its verdict. "I would like to leave Tyler to rest in peace, and for me and my family to be left to grieve." But Tyler's death was not just a tragedy for one family. It was a failure of the entire child protection system. The serious case review conducted by the Peterborough Safeguarding Children Board laid bare just how badly the authorities had let Tyler down. Malcolm Newsom was the Executive Director of Children's Services at Peterborough City Council at the time the review was published. He admitted publicly that there were lessons to be learned from Tyler's death. He acknowledged that the council could have done more for Tyler. Newsom said Tyler's death happened during what he called the darkest days of the department. He admitted there were opportunities to learn more about Tyler and his home life, and we missed those opportunities. He said plainly, "I am clear that we let Tyler down, and publicly apologise on behalf of the council, because we could have done more for him." The review identified specific failures. There had been no child protection plan put in place for Tyler, despite the warning signs. The social work assessments that were conducted were of very poor quality. Interagency communication was incredibly poor. Different organisations were not talking to each other properly. The review noted that the GP practice tended to work in isolation. The police and hospital had ceased their involvement once they completed their immediate interventions regarding the fractured leg and genital injuries. Probation services continued working with Lee because of his domestic violence order, but their role was very specific to him rather than focused on protecting Tyler. Nobody was looking at the whole picture. Each agency saw only its own small piece of the puzzle, and because nobody put the pieces together, Tyler remained in a dangerous home with a violent man. By the time the trial concluded, not a single manager in Peterborough's Children's Services Department who had been in their posts at the time of Tyler's death was still working there. Every one of them had left. At least one was the subject of a disciplinary matter. The department underwent a complete turnover of leadership. In the years after Tyler's death, Peterborough City Council worked to improve its children's services. Additional social workers were hired, new computer systems were installed, management structures were reformed. By 2019, the service had been rated as good by Ofsted, a dramatic improvement from the failing department of 2010 and 2011. But all of those improvements came too late for Tyler Whelan. He was already dead by the time the system started fixing itself. Tyler's father, Sean Harrison, continued to campaign for changes to the law in the years after his son's death. In February 2019, as Tyler would have been approaching his teenage years, Harrison called for legal reforms to protect children like his son. Harrison pointed out that he was never told about the concerns that social services had raised about Tyler. The father of the child was kept completely in the dark, while professionals discussed whether his son was being abused. By the time Harrison learned what had been happening, Tyler was already gone. Harrison also noted that social services never visited the home where Tyler lived with Lee and his mother. Professionals never saw with their own eyes the environment where Tyler was suffering. If they had made a home visit, they might have seen something that would have saved Tyler's life. Harrison struggled for years with the aftermath of his son's murder. He told reporters that he still did not like leaving the house. His family had been supportive, but they were not as close as they had been before the tragedy. He received some counselling from victim support after the case, but not much. He was still getting help from his GP to cope with depression years after Tyler's death. Harrison called for people in his situation to be offered counselling by law. He believed that families who lose children to murder deserve more support than they currently receive. The case of Tyler Whelan also highlighted the problem of violent men with histories of domestic abuse being allowed to live with children. Elvis Lee had previous convictions for attacking a former partner. He was known to police for violence against Stephanie Whelan, and yet he was allowed to live in a home with a vulnerable young child. Lee had been ordered to take part in a domestic violence program because of his previous convictions. This program was supposed to help him change his behavior. It clearly did not work. Lee went on to murder a 5-year-old boy. The question that Tyler's case raises is whether men with domestic violence convictions should be allowed to live with children at all. If the authorities had taken Lee's history more seriously, if they had recognised that a man who beats women is also likely to hurt children, Tyler might still be alive today. Instead, Tyler suffered in silence. He was beaten repeatedly over many months. He was bitten by his stepfather, hard enough to leave a mark. He was kicked so hard that his internal organs were destroyed, and he died in hospital, alone and afraid, at just 5 years old. Elvis Lee is where he belongs now. He is in prison, serving a life sentence. He will not be eligible for parole until he is well into his 50s, and even then, there is no guarantee he will be released. He may spend the rest of his life behind bars for what he did to Tyler Whelan. Stephanie Whelan served her 4-year sentence for allowing her son's death. She has to live with the knowledge that her choices contributed to Tyler's murder. She chose to stay with a violent man. She chose not to protect her child, and now her child is dead because of it. But the guilt for Tyler's death does not rest solely with Lee and Whelan. The system failed this boy. Doctors raised concerns and nothing was done. Social workers were assigned to the case and never followed through. Police knew about domestic violence in the household and did not intervene effectively. Multiple agencies had pieces of information that, if combined, would have shown a child in serious danger. But they never combined that information. They never saw the full picture. Tyler Whelan deserved better. He deserved a childhood free from violence. He deserved adults who would protect him. He deserved to grow up, to go to school, to make friends, to become the man his father dreamed he would become. He got none of that. He got Elvis Lee instead, a man with 56 previous offences. A man who was twice Tyler's height and 4 times his weight. A man who bit and kicked a 5-year-old child until that child died. The judge at Lee's trial suspected that Lee had inflicted more blows than he admitted. We will never know the full extent of what Tyler suffered in that house. We only know that he suffered greatly, that he told no one, and that in the end, his suffering killed him. Tyler Whelan was 5 years old. He had a big heart and an amazing smile. He was fun-loving and mischievous. He was his father's pride and joy, and he was murdered by the man who was supposed to be taking care of him. Elvis Lee got 17.5 years before he can even apply for parole. That works out to about 3.5 years for every year of Tyler's short life. It does not seem like enough. No sentence ever seems like enough when a child has been murdered. But at least Lee is locked away where he cannot hurt anyone else. At least this one violent man has been removed from society. At least Tyler Whelan got some measure of justice, even though that justice came far too late to save his life. The memory of Tyler lives on in his father's heart. Sean Harrison still misses his son. He still grieves for the boy he lost. He still wishes he could have protected Tyler from the monster who killed him. Tyler would have turned 13 in February 2019 when his father spoke to reporters about the case. He would have been a teenager, dealing with all the challenges and joys that come with that age. Instead, he remained forever 5 years old, frozen in time, a victim of a crime that should never have happened. Elvis Lee murdered Tyler Whelan. That is the simple truth of this case. A violent man with a long criminal history attacked a defenseless child and killed him. And the system that was supposed to protect children like Tyler stood by and let it happen. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Case number 4. September 2015, a 12-year-old girl was found dead in her bedroom inside a family home in the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales, Australia. The person who killed her was supposed to protect her. He was the man who lived under the same roof as her, the man who her mother trusted to help raise her children. Her stepfather. And what police found when they entered that home would be described as one of the worst things they had ever seen in their careers. The girl lived in Aberglaslyn. This is a small suburb located near the city of Maitland, which sits about 2 hours north of Sydney. The Hunter Valley is known for its vineyards, its coal mines, and its quiet suburban neighbourhoods where families settle down to raise their kids. Aberglaslyn is one of those neighbourhoods. The kind of place where children ride their bikes on the footpaths and neighbours wave to each other over the fence. It was not the kind of place anyone expected something like this to happen. The girl cannot be named for legal reasons. In Australian courts, when a victim is a child, their identity is often protected to preserve their dignity and to shield surviving family members from further trauma. So for the purposes of this case, she has been referred to publicly as CN. Her stepfather also cannot be named, and he is referred to in legal documents as JK. These are the names we will use throughout this story. CN was just 12 years old. She had several younger siblings. Her mother had entered into a relationship with JK, and he became the man of the house. The family lived together in their Aberglaslyn home. From the outside, it looked like any other family home on any other suburban street. But inside those walls, something terrible was happening. Something that had been going on for years before anyone found out. According to court documents and news reports, the abuse inside that home began in 2011. That was when JK first started hurting CN and her younger sister. The abuse did not happen once or twice. It was not a single incident of violence that got out of hand. It was systematic. It was prolonged. It went on for years. CN was a child living in fear inside her own home, being hurt by the man who was supposed to take care of her. The extent of what CN endured is hard to comprehend. Court documents revealed that JK carried out acts of cruelty against her that can only be described as torture. He did not simply hit her. He did not simply punish her in ways that crossed the line. He subjected her to prolonged physical abuse, using multiple weapons and methods over an extended period of time. And it all happened behind closed doors, in a home where neighbours had no idea what was going on. As the years passed, the violence against CN escalated. What started in 2011 grew worse and worse over time. The abuse became more frequent, the methods became more brutal. CN was a young girl with no way to escape. She depended on the adults in her life to protect her, and instead one of those adults was hurting her in unimaginable ways. Her mother knew what was happening inside that home. The courts would later determine that she did nothing to stop it. In September 2015, everything came to a horrific end. By this point, CN had endured years of abuse at the hands of her stepfather, but what happened in the final days of her life was beyond anything she had experienced before. According to court documents, JK subjected CN to 3 days of sustained torture before she died. 3 days. That is how long this 12-year-old girl suffered at the hands of her stepfather before her body finally gave out. During those 3 final days, JK tied CN to a bed. He then beat her using various objects: bed slats, belts, electrical cords. These were the weapons he used against a child who could not fight back and had nowhere to run. He struck her over and over again. The abuse was relentless. And to make it even worse, CN's younger sister was forced to watch. She witnessed what was happening to her older sister. She saw everything that JK was doing to CN, and she could do nothing to stop it. But the physical beatings were not enough for JK. He also rubbed salt and vinegar into the wounds he had inflicted on CN. He deliberately caused her additional pain on top of the injuries he had already given her. This was not discipline that went too far. This was not anger that got out of control. This was calculated cruelty against a defenseless child. JK knew exactly what he was doing. He chose to inflict maximum suffering on a 12-year-old girl who had no way to protect herself. By the time it was over, CN had more than 50 injuries on her body. 50. That is how many wounds this little girl carried on her body when she died. The judge who later sentenced JK said that CN's little body gave up after years of abuse. She could not take any more. Her body had been broken by years of violence, and those final 3 days of torture were more than she could survive. On the morning of Wednesday, September 23, 2015, police were called to the home in Aberglaslyn. It was around 5:40 in the morning. What they found when they arrived would stay with them for the rest of their careers. CN was found dead in her bedroom. The injuries on her body told the story of what she had endured. Police immediately knew this was not an accident. This was murder. JK did not stay at the scene. After killing his stepdaughter, he fled the home in the family car. He drove away, leaving behind the body of the child he had tortured to death. He did not call for help. He did not try to save her. He simply ran. But he did not get far. Police tracked him down and arrested him a short time later in Rutherford, a nearby suburb. His attempt to escape failed. He was taken into custody and charged with murder. The news of CN's death sent shockwaves through the community. Neighbours in Aberglaslyn were stunned. A former neighbour who came to pay her respects told reporters that she regularly saw the children playing together in their front yard. From the outside, everything looked normal. Nobody suspected what was happening behind closed doors. Nobody knew that a little girl was being tortured in her own home. Floral tributes began appearing near the family home. Local children came to leave cards and bouquets at a makeshift memorial that formed on the street. The messages they left were heartbreaking. "Little angel, you were taken too early. Wishing you beautiful dreams in heaven." The community mourned a child they had seen riding her bike and playing with her siblings, a child whose life was cut short by the very person who should have protected her. Superintendent Craig Jackson of the New South Wales Police spoke to reporters about the case. He described the killing as a truly horrific event. He said it was up there with some of the worst cases he had ever seen in his career. Police officers are trained to deal with difficult situations. They see things that most people never have to witness. But even for experienced officers, what happened to CN was almost too much to comprehend. The level of cruelty inflicted on a child was beyond anything they had encountered before. JK appeared in court the day after his arrest. He was brought before Maitland Local Court on Thursday, September 24, 2015. He did not apply for bail. The court formally refused bail anyway, meaning he would remain in custody while awaiting trial. His case was scheduled to return to Newcastle Local Court on October 7th. Police also requested an apprehended violence order against JK to protect CN's mother and surviving siblings. Even behind bars, authorities were concerned he could still pose a threat to the family. The investigation into CN's death continued over the following weeks and months. Detectives from the Hunter Child Abuse Squad worked to piece together the full extent of what had happened inside that home. They interviewed witnesses, they gathered evidence. They built a case that would ultimately result in one of the longest sentences ever handed down for a crime like this in New South Wales. As the investigation progressed, more disturbing details emerged. Police learned that JK had been abusing both CN and her younger sister since 2011. That was 4 years of violence against 2 children, 4 years during which the abuse escalated until it finally ended in murder. The surviving sister had witnessed the torture of her older sibling. She had been forced to watch her stepfather tie CN to a bed and beat her for 3 days. The psychological trauma she suffered is impossible to measure. The mother was also charged in connection with the case. While JK was the one who physically abused and killed CN, her mother knew what was happening and did nothing to stop it. She allowed the abuse to continue for years. She failed to protect her own daughter from a man who was torturing her. Initially, she was charged with manslaughter for her role in CN's death. The maximum penalty she faced was 4 years in prison, with a non-parole period of 18 months. In March 2018, more than 2 years after CN's death, JK appeared before the New South Wales Supreme Court for sentencing. He had pleaded guilty to murder. There was no trial. He admitted what he had done. Now it was time for him to learn his fate. Justice Peter Hamill presided over the sentencing. He had seen the evidence. He had read the reports detailing what JK had done to his stepdaughter, and he did not hold back when describing the crimes. Justice Hamill called them heinous acts of cruelty. He spoke about how CN had endured years of abuse before her death. He described how her little body gave up after the final 3 days of torture. This was not a moment of anger that went too far. This was sustained cruelty against a defenceless child. The sentence that Justice Hamill handed down reflected the severity of the crimes. JK was sentenced to 37 years in prison. His non-parole period was set at 28 years. That meant he would not be eligible to apply for parole until 2043. He would be in his 60s before he could even ask to be released. And even then, there was no guarantee he would be let out. But prison was not the only consequence JK faced. He was not an Australian citizen. He had originally come from a country in Africa. Upon his release from prison, whenever that might be, he would be deported back to his homeland. He would never be allowed to return to Australia. The country that he had chosen to build a life in wanted nothing more to do with him. He had committed one of the worst crimes imaginable against a child, and Australia was going to make sure he could never do it again on their soil. The sentencing made headlines across Australia. A Hunter Valley man who tortured and murdered his stepdaughter with bed slats, belts, and electrical cords has been sentenced to 37 years in jail. That was how the news reports described it. The details were so horrific that even seasoned journalists struggled to write about them. This was not an ordinary murder case. This was something far darker. After JK was sentenced for CN's murder, the legal proceedings were not over. Police had continued investigating during the years between his arrest and his sentencing. They discovered that the abuse inside that home had affected more than just CN. Her younger sister had also been a victim, and both JK and CN's mother were charged with additional offences related to the abuse of the surviving daughter. The charges related to assaults that occurred between 2014 and 2015. This was the same period during which CN was also being abused. Both children were being hurt inside that home. Both were living in fear. And while CN did not survive, her younger sister had to carry the trauma of what she had witnessed and experienced for the rest of her life. The case highlighted serious failures in the systems that are supposed to protect children. How did years of abuse go undetected? How did a child suffer for so long without anyone noticing? These were questions that authorities had to grapple with in the aftermath of CN's death. The community wanted answers. They wanted to know how something like this could happen in their neighbourhood without anyone stepping in to help. CN's death occurred during what news reports described as a horror month for domestic violence in Australia. In September 2015 alone, 7 women and children were killed in alleged domestic incidents across the country. A 6-year-old girl was killed by her father in Brisbane. A mother was beaten to death by her former partner on the Gold Coast. A grandmother and her grandson were stabbed in Sydney. A woman was shot dead at a fast food restaurant by a man believed to be her ex-partner. A heavily pregnant woman was stabbed to death in her home by her partner. And then there was CN. The scale of domestic violence in Australia during that period prompted action from the federal government. Just one day after CN's stepfather appeared in court, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull announced that the government would pledge $100 million to combat domestic violence. Turnbull called the situation a national disgrace. He acknowledged that the country needed to do more to protect vulnerable women and children from violence in their own homes. But for CN, that money came too late. The programs it would fund could not bring her back. The resources it would provide could not undo the years of torture she had endured. All the government funding in the world could not change what happened to a 12-year-old girl in a quiet suburb of the Hunter Valley. Her death became part of the statistics that governments use to justify their policies. She became a number in a report. But to the people who knew her, she was so much more than that. The community in Aberglaslyn continued to mourn CN long after the news cameras left. The makeshift memorial near her home remained in place for weeks. People kept bringing flowers and cards. They wanted to show that CN had not been forgotten, that her life had mattered, that even though she had been failed by the people who were supposed to protect her, there were others who cared about what happened to her. Justice Hamill's sentencing remarks painted a picture of the kind of cruelty that most people cannot even imagine. He spoke about the weapons JK used, the bed slats, the belts, the electrical cords. He described how JK rubbed salt and vinegar into CN's wounds. He detailed the 3 days of torture that preceded her death. Every word was designed to explain why the sentence needed to be so severe, why JK needed to spend almost 4 decades behind bars before he could even ask to be considered for release. The sentence was one of the longest ever handed down for a case like this in New South Wales. 37 years, a non-parole period of 28 years, deportation upon release. JK would spend the best years of his life in prison. He would grow old behind bars, and even if he did eventually get out, he would be sent back to Africa. He would never be free to walk the streets of Australia again. The country had made its judgment clear. What he did was unforgivable. CN's younger sister would have to live with what she saw for the rest of her life. She watched her stepfather torture her older sister to death. She witnessed 3 days of brutality that no child should ever have to see. The psychological scars from that experience would never fully heal. She lost her sister. She saw her mother fail to protect them. She had to process the fact that the man who was supposed to be a father figure was actually a monster. The case also raised questions about the mother's role. She knew what was happening. The courts determined that she did nothing to stop the abuse. She allowed her daughter to be tortured under her own roof. She failed in the most basic duty a parent has, which is to protect their child from harm. Her charges reflected her complicity in what happened, even if she did not physically inflict the injuries herself. CN's story is one that people do not want to hear. It is easier to look away. It is easier to pretend that things like this do not happen. But they do happen. They happen in quiet suburban neighbourhoods where nobody expects violence. They happen behind closed doors where nobody can see. They happen to children who have no voice and no way to escape. CN was one of those children, and her death serves as a reminder that we cannot afford to look away. The person who was supposed to be her stepfather turned out to be her killer, the man who sat at the dinner table with her, the man who lived under the same roof, the man who her mother chose to bring into their lives. He took everything from her. He took her childhood, he took her safety, he took her life, and he did it slowly, over 4 years, before finally ending it with 3 days of unimaginable cruelty. JK is now serving his sentence in a New South Wales prison. Every day he wakes up behind bars. Every day he faces the consequences of what he did. In 2043, he will have served 28 years. That is when he becomes eligible to apply for parole. But there is no guarantee he will be released. The parole board will have to consider the nature of his crimes. They will have to decide if he poses a risk to the community. Given what he did to CN, there is a strong argument that he should never be let out, and if he is released, he will not stay in Australia. Deportation proceedings will begin immediately. He will be sent back to Africa, to the country he originally came from. He will have to rebuild his life in a place where he has not lived for decades. He will be an old man by then, with nothing but the memory of what he did and the years he spent paying for it. CN did not get the chance to grow old. She did not get the chance to graduate from school. She did not get the chance to fall in love, to have a career, to have children of her own. All of those possibilities were taken from her by her stepfather. He stole her future. He stole her potential. He stole everything she could have become. The people of Aberglaslyn still remember what happened. The house where CN lived still stands on its street. Families still raise their children in that neighbourhood. Life goes on, as it always does. But there are people in that community who will never forget the little girl who died in that house. They will never forget the floral tributes. They will never forget the cards left by local children who wanted to honour her memory. CN's legacy is a complicated one. She is remembered as a victim of terrible abuse. Her death became part of a national conversation about domestic violence. Her case contributed to policy changes and increased funding for programs designed to protect women and children. In death, she may have helped save others from similar fates, but none of that changes what happened to her. None of that brings her back. This is what happens when trusted guardians become murderous monsters. This is the reality of domestic violence when it goes unchecked for years. This is the consequence of a system that fails to protect its most vulnerable members. CN was failed by her stepfather. She was failed by her mother. She was failed by everyone who should have noticed what was happening and stepped in to help. And in the end, she paid the ultimate price. The sentence handed down to JK reflected the severity of his crimes. 37 years is a long time. 28 years before parole is even a possibility is a long time. But for CN, time ran out when she was just 12 years old. She never got the chance to see justice served. She never got to stand in that courtroom and watch her abuser learn his fate. All she knew was the pain and the fear and the suffering that he inflicted on her. That was her entire experience of his role in her life. JK went from being a trusted guardian to a murderous monster. He took on the responsibility of helping to raise children, and instead he tortured and killed one of them. He abused his position of trust in the worst way imaginable, and now he sits in a prison cell, counting the years until he might be eligible for release. That is his punishment. That is the consequence of his actions. It will never be enough to balance the scales for what he did to CN, but it is something. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to case number 5. Case number 5. In March 2015, an 18-year-old college freshman came home for spring break. She was excited to see her family, to sleep in her own bed, and to take a break from the pressures of her first year at university. 5 weeks later, her body was found partially buried behind an abandoned house, nearly 50 miles from home. The person responsible for putting her there was the man she called Dad. the man who had adopted her, the man who was supposed to protect her. Her stepfather. Angelica Hadsall was born on August 9, 1996 in Chesapeake, Virginia. Everyone called her AJ. From the moment she could walk, she was an athlete. She played softball, she swam, she played field hockey and soccer. Sports were her passion, and she was good at them. Really good. By high school, she was starting on her varsity softball team as a freshman. Her coaches and teammates said she made everyone around her want to be better. That was the kind of person AJ was. She lifted people up. AJ grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, with her mother Jennifer and her younger siblings. Her biological father, Mel Langer, was never really part of her life. He lived in Florida, and by his own admission, AJ was a distant part of his existence. When he heard about what happened to her, he told reporters he was heartbroken that he never got to spend more time with her. But by then, it was too late. The first real father figure in AJ's life was a man named Zach Hoffer. He married AJ's mother when AJ was young, and for about 13 years, he was her dad. He and Jennifer had 2 daughters together, which meant AJ had 2 half-sisters she adored. She helped take care of them. She was a good big sister, responsible, caring, always looking out for the younger kids in the family. But marriages fall apart. When AJ was around 8 years old, her mother's relationship with Zach ended. AJ lost daily contact with the man she had called Dad for most of her childhood. It was hard on her. Kids need stability, and suddenly the family structure she had known was changing. Then Wesley Hadsall came into their lives. Wesley met AJ's mother Jennifer, and they started a relationship. He moved in with the family. He became a father figure to AJ and her siblings, and in 2012, when AJ was 16 years old, Wesley officially adopted her. She went from being Angelica Hoffer at school to Angelica Hadsall. She had a new last name and, she thought, a new dad who would be there for her. AJ graduated from high school and enrolled at Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia. It is a small college town about 2 hours west of Norfolk. AJ joined the club softball team and wore the number 6 jersey. She also played on the club field hockey team. Her friends and teammates said she was outgoing, energetic, and had a bright personality. At a candlelight vigil held after her death, many of them wore bright colours to honour the kind of person she was. Happy, full of life. Someone who made you smile just by being around her. College was an adjustment for AJ, as it is for most freshmen. She was dealing with the normal stresses of being away from home for the first time. She had a boyfriend named Joshua Campbell, and like many young relationships, theirs had its ups and downs. She was figuring out who she was and what she wanted from life. She had her whole future ahead of her. In early 2015, AJ was looking forward to spring break. A chance to go home, see her family, sleep in her own bed, and take a break from classes. She arrived at her family's home in the Tarleton neighbourhood of Norfolk, ready for a relaxing week off. But things at home were not good. In the days before AJ arrived, her mother Jennifer had kicked Wesley out of the house. The reason was his drug use and his increasingly erratic behaviour. Wesley had been using heroin, and his actions had become unpredictable and concerning. Jennifer had had enough. She told him to leave. Wesley was staying at a motel in Norfolk. He was angry about being kicked out. He was struggling with his addiction, and he was not in a good place mentally or emotionally. AJ was upset too. She had found out that the man she called Dad was using drugs. It changed how she saw him. She was disappointed and hurt. On March 2nd, 2015, AJ was at home in Norfolk. Her mother had gone to work. AJ was in the living room, folding laundry and listening to music. It was a normal day, just a teenager doing chores during spring break. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. When Jennifer came home from work that evening, something was wrong. The laundry AJ had been folding was only half done. The music was still playing on the speaker, but AJ was gone. Some of her clothes were missing, but her wallet and coat were still there. There was a note that said she needed some time away from family issues. Jennifer was immediately concerned. This was not like AJ. She was responsible. She did not just disappear without telling anyone where she was going. Jennifer tried calling and texting her daughter, but got no response. The next morning, March 3rd, unusual text messages came from AJ's phone, but they did not sound like AJ. The family knew something was very wrong. They reported her missing to the Norfolk Police Department. Detective David Benjamin was assigned to the case. At first, police said they did not suspect foul play. Missing person cases often turn out to be young people who left on their own and return within a few days. But as hours turned into days with no sign of AJ, the investigation grew more serious. One name kept coming up: Wesley Hadsell. AJ's stepfather inserted himself into the search efforts from the very beginning. He talked to the media constantly. He led search parties. He stood outside the home of a young man he accused of being involved in AJ's disappearance, blowing a horn all night so the man could not sleep. To some people, he looked like a desperate father trying to find his daughter. To investigators, his behaviour seemed strange, almost too eager, too involved. Police searched Wesley's work van. Inside, they found a roll of duct tape, work gloves, and a shovel. All of them had dirt residue on them. The van belonged to Wesley's employer, Quality Plumbing and Mechanical, and it was equipped with a GPS tracking system. When investigators examined the GPS data, they found something important. The van had travelled to Southampton County, about 50 miles south of Norfolk, near the North Carolina border. It had gone down a road called Smith's Ferry Road, past an abandoned house, and continued into North Carolina. On April 9, 2015, police followed the trail left by that GPS system. It led them to an abandoned brick ranch house on Smith's Ferry Road in Southampton County. Detective Benjamin walked around the property, searching the overgrown yard. Behind the house, near a muddy creek, he noticed a piece of plywood lying on the ground. He lifted it up. Underneath was the body of AJ Hadsell. She was lying face down in a drainage ditch. Her sweatpants had been pulled down. She had been there for weeks, exposed to the elements and to animals. The young woman who had been so full of life, who had played softball and made her teammates better, who had helped raise her younger siblings, was gone, discarded behind an abandoned house like she meant nothing. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy. The cause of death was determined to be acute heroin poisoning combined with homicidal violence. The amount of heroin in AJ's system was 3 times the lethal dose. Her eyes and chin were blackened and bruised. There were bruises across her chest that were consistent with someone holding her down, pressing an arm across her body. Additional bruising on her chin suggested someone had gripped it tightly in their hands. Investigators believed they knew how the heroin had been forced into her. AJ had no history of drug use. She did not drink. She did not do drugs. Her friends and family all said she flew straight. She was a good kid. There were no needle marks on her body that would suggest she had injected herself. Everything pointed to someone else forcing the drugs into her system. The medical examiner could not determine whether AJ had been sexually assaulted. The damage to her body from being outside for 5 weeks, exposed to animals and insects, made it impossible to say for certain. But the position of her body and the state of her clothing suggested something terrible had happened to her before she died. While police were still searching for AJ, Wesley had been arrested on unrelated charges. He had broken into the home of one of AJ's male friends, a young man named Corey French. Wesley claimed he found AJ's Longwood University softball jacket inside the house and said he believed French was involved in her disappearance. French was terrified. He was interrogated by police for over 12 hours, asked repeatedly if he had killed AJ. When investigators showed him the jacket that had been found in his home, he broke down crying. He had no idea how it got there. He had nothing to do with AJ's disappearance. Police eventually figured out what had happened. Wesley had broken into French's home and planted the jacket there himself. He was trying to frame an innocent person for a crime he had committed. Wesley later admitted to breaking into the house during a television interview, though he denied planting the jacket. The investigation continued to uncover more evidence against Wesley. Police found heroin hidden in a crevice near the ceiling of the motel room where he had been staying after getting kicked out by his wife. They also found about 80 rounds of ammunition, including 9mm bullets. As a convicted felon, Wesley was not allowed to possess ammunition. He was arrested on federal weapons charges. Even more damning was what police learned from Wesley's drug dealer. The dealer testified that he sold heroin to Wesley the day after AJ was reported missing. The day after she disappeared, her stepfather was buying the same drug that killed her. Cadaver dogs were brought to Wesley's motel room. They alerted to the scent of human decomposition. AJ's body had been in that room at some point. Cell phone records showed that Wesley's phone and AJ's phone were pinging in the same locations the day after she disappeared. They were together, and surveillance video from a gas station showed Wesley buying fuel near the abandoned house where AJ's body was eventually found. In the video, witnesses said he looked nervous, glancing around as he filled up his van. Despite all this evidence, it took years for Wesley to be charged with murder. He was serving time on the federal ammunition charge and also faced charges in Ohio related to allegations that he had kidnapped and raped his first wife back in 2005. Those Ohio charges had originally been dropped when he was indicted for robbing a bank in Fredericksburg, Virginia, a crime he committed while on the run with his then wife. He served about 4.5 years in federal prison for that robbery. Wesley's criminal history stretched back to when he was just 12 years old. Burglaries, breaking and entering, a conviction for felonious restraint involving his 15-year-old girlfriend when he was 19. The bank robbery, the allegations of kidnapping and raping his first wife. This was a man with a long record of violence and criminal behaviour, and now investigators believed he had murdered his adopted daughter. In November 2018, more than 3 years after AJ's body was found, Wesley Hadsall was finally charged with her murder. His first trial began in February 2020 in Southampton County Circuit Court, but it ended in a mistrial after just 2 days. The prosecution and defence could not agree on what parts of Wesley's criminal history the jury should be allowed to hear. The case would have to be tried again. The second trial began in late January 2022, more than 6 years after AJ's death. This time, the trial lasted about 2.5 weeks. 14 jurors were selected from an initial pool of 73 potential candidates. The prosecution laid out their case. They argued that Wesley, angry about being kicked out of the house and struggling with his drug addiction, had abducted AJ from the family home while she was folding laundry. They believed he took her because he wanted to sexually assault her. When she resisted, when she fought back, he killed her. Prosecutor Eric Cook told the jury it was Wesley's last chance to be with AJ. He wanted something from her. She did not give it to him. And then he discarded her like trash. Deputy Commonwealth's Attorney Tony Colvin described the bruises on AJ's body. The marks across her chest were consistent with someone pinning her down, pressing an arm across her to hold her in place. The bruises on her chin showed someone had gripped her face tightly. That was how they believed Wesley forced the heroin into her. He abused her, he beat her, and then he poisoned her with heroin. That is what Colvin told the jury. The prosecution presented all the evidence: the GPS data from the work van, the cell phone records, the surveillance video, the heroin found in Wesley's motel room, the testimony from his drug dealer, the cadaver dogs, the planted jacket, the lies Wesley had told to try to throw investigators off his trail. The defense tried a different approach. Wesley's lawyer argued that AJ had committed suicide. They pointed to the fact that she was going through a breakup with her boyfriend. They showed the jury sad memes and images that had been saved on her phone. They noted that a doctor had prescribed her an antidepressant. That doctor was Ralph Northam, who later became the governor of Virginia. At the time he treated AJ, he was a pediatric neurologist in Norfolk. He took the stand during the trial and explained that he had prescribed nortriptyline to AJ to help treat her migraines. It was not because she was depressed. He testified that his patient did not suffer from depression. AJ's mother Jennifer also testified. She told the jury that AJ had been happy at the time of her disappearance. She described Wesley's behaviour in the days surrounding AJ's death as odd and erratic. He was always coming and going. He seemed on edge. On February 7th, 2022, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for about 45 minutes, less than an hour. That is how long it took them to reach a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of concealing a dead body. Wesley shook his head when the verdicts were read. In the gallery, 2 of AJ's younger sisters began to cry. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. After almost 7 years, they finally had justice for AJ. The sentencing hearing was held on April 4th, 2022. Circuit Judge L. Wayne Farmer presided. AJ's mother and her 3 sisters did not attend. It was too painful. The prosecutor, Eric Cook, told reporters afterward that it was just too raw for them. They were incredibly hurt by what the defendant had done. But AJ's former stepfather, Zach Hoffer, was there, the man who had raised her for 13 years before Wesley came into their lives. He wanted to read a victim impact statement about how AJ's death had affected him and his 2 daughters, AJ's half-sisters. The judge ruled that Hoffer did not meet the legal criteria to give a victim impact statement. Hoffer did not accept the decision. He refused to leave the witness stand. He started reading his statement anyway. Deputies approached him to remove him from the courtroom. What happened next showed just how much pain this case had caused. Hoffa resisted. He was a large man, standing about 6'4" or 6'5" tall. As deputies tried to escort him out, he lunged at Wesley Hadsell. "AJ is my daughter, you coward." That is what Hoffa screamed at the man who killed her. It took about 5 deputies to wrestle Hoffa to the ground. They handcuffed him and dragged him out of the courtroom as he continued to struggle and yell. After order was restored, Wesley was given a chance to speak. He read a prepared statement claiming his innocence. He said he loved AJ. He said he loved his family. He said he would never do something like this. Judge Farmer did not believe a word of it. The judge called the evidence against Wesley overwhelming. He said the jury had paid closer attention to the case than any he had seen in 30 years of criminal trials. He dismissed Wesley's claims of innocence and his attempt to blame AJ's death on suicide. Then Judge Farmer delivered his sentence and his words. "You took a beautiful young life and dumped her like a piece of trash in a pit. Life in prison for first-degree murder. 5 years for concealing a dead body, 10 additional years for possessing drugs while incarcerated on an unrelated charge. Life plus 15 years, the maximum allowed under the law. Every day you spend incarcerated is a day the community does not have to worry about what you are doing." That is what the judge told Wesley. Wesley maintained his innocence. He said he had been wrongfully convicted and that the fight was not over. He said he would appeal. His defense attorney, James Ellenson, said they were considering their options, but for the people who loved AJ, the fight was over. 7 years of waiting, 7 years of wondering if justice would ever come, and now the man who killed her would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Wesley Hadsell was 43 years old at the time of his conviction. He will die in prison. AJ Hadsell was 18 years old when she died. She was a freshman in college. She played softball. She had a bright personality that made everyone around her want to be better. She had 3 younger siblings who looked up to her. She had her whole life ahead of her. Her stepfather took all of that away. The evidence showed that Wesley abducted AJ from her own home while she was doing something as simple as folding laundry. He took her because he wanted something from her. When she would not give it to him, he held her down, forced heroin into her body, and watched her die. Then he drove 50 miles to an abandoned house in Southampton County and dumped her body in a ditch. He covered her with a piece of plywood and left her there to rot. He spent the following weeks pretending to search for her. He talked to reporters. He led search parties. He broke into an innocent person's home and planted evidence to frame them. He lied to police over and over again, all while knowing exactly where AJ's body was, all while knowing he was the one who put her there. That is what a monster does. That is what Wesley Hadsell did to his own adopted daughter. The case of AJ Hadsell is a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in a child's life is someone inside their own home. Wesley Hadsell was supposed to be a father to AJ. She trusted him. Her mother trusted him. He was given access to their family, to their home, to their lives. And he used that access to commit an unthinkable crime. At Longwood University, AJ's friends and teammates gathered for a candlelight vigil after her death was confirmed. They wore bright colours to honour her bright personality. Her number 6 softball jersey hung in front of the crowd. Students who knew her shared stories about her smile, her energy, her love of sports. Students who did not know her mourned her anyway, because she was one of them. A young person with dreams and plans and a future that was stolen from her. The university president sent an email to the campus community. He wrote that the weight of this horrible prospect had loomed for weeks, but now their worst fear had been confirmed. He asked everyone to keep AJ's family in their thoughts and to reach out to each other for support during such a difficult time. AJ was buried in Norfolk. Her memorial service was held on April 18, 2015, just over a week after her body was identified. In lieu of flowers, her family asked for donations to a memorial fund set up in her name. 7 years later, her killer was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison. Wesley Hadsell went from being a trusted guardian to a murderous monster. He adopted a teenage girl who was looking for a father figure. He became part of her family. He lived under the same roof as her. He ate dinner at the same table. And when his drug addiction spiraled out of control and he was kicked out of the house, He came back and took the one thing that cannot be replaced: a human life. Ajay Hadsell deserved better. She deserved to graduate from college. She deserved to play more softball. She deserved to fall in love, to build a career, to have a family of her own someday. She deserved to grow old. Instead, she is forever 18, a face on a missing poster, a name in court documents, a victim of the man who was supposed to protect her. Judge Farmer was right. Wesley Hadsell took a beautiful young life and dumped her like a piece of trash, and now he will spend every remaining day of his existence paying for it. That is not justice. Justice would be AJ still being alive, but it is the closest thing to justice that our system can provide. Life in prison, no possibility of ever walking free again, no possibility of ever hurting another person. Wesley Hadsell is where he belongs, and AJ Hadsell will never be forgotten. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the final case of the video, case number 6. On April 17th, 2012, a 10-year-old boy was running for his life down Sycamore Street in Buffalo, New York. His stepfather was chasing him. A neighbor saw the boy and stopped her car to help. She thought she was doing a good thing. She thought she was helping a family. Instead, she helped deliver a child to his death. Abdifatah Muhammad was born on September 17, 2001, in a hospital in Uganda. He came into the world just 6 days after the September 11th terrorist attacks changed America forever. His mother, Shukri Bile, had fled violence in Somalia that had already claimed the life of her older children's father. She ended up in a refugee camp in Uganda, where she gave birth to Abdifatah and tried to build a better life for her family. Everyone called the boy Abdi. It was easier to say, and it fit his personality. He was a sweet kid, a smart kid, a kid who loved watching television and ordering the number 6 hamburger meal at McDonald's. He was just a normal 10-year-old boy who wanted to play, to laugh, to be loved, and to feel safe. In February 2004, Shukri Bile and her 5 children were allowed to come to the United States as refugees. Abdi was only about 2.5 years old when they arrived. Buffalo, New York became their new home. The city had a growing Somali immigrant community that numbered more than 1,000 people. It was supposed to be a place where they could finally be safe, a place where they could build a real future. Just 2 weeks after arriving in America, Shukri met a man named Ali Muhammad Muhammad. He was also from Somalia. He had been in the United States for about a decade by that point. He worked as a security guard for a company called US Security Associates and was assigned to work at the Buffalo News newspaper building. He seemed like a hard worker. He seemed respectable. He seemed like a good man. Shukri and Ali got married. Together they had 2 sons, Barkad and Adam. Combined with Shukri's children from before, including her 3 grown children and Abdi, the blended family had 6 kids total. They moved into a house at 30 Guilford Street on the east side of Buffalo, near the Broadway Market. It was supposed to be a fresh start for everyone. Ali Muhammad Muhammad became Abdi's stepfather. According to family members who testified at trial, Muhammad treated Abdi like his own son. He attended the boy's parent-teacher meetings. He checked his homework every night. He seemed to care deeply about the boy's education and his future. He once told a family member that he hoped to see Abdi become a scientist one day. But there was another side to Ali Muhammad Muhammad, a side that the family kept hidden, a side that Abdi knew all too well. The first time Buffalo police were called to the Guilford Street home was not long after the family moved there in 2009. Over the next 3 years, officers would respond to that address 16 times. Some of the calls were for minor things, others were for domestic violence. There was something wrong in that house. The signs were there for anyone paying attention. Abdi told other kids in the neighbourhood that his stepfather was abusive. He told his classmates at school too. But those complaints never made their way to adults who could help him. Children talk to other children. They do not always know how to ask for help from grown-ups. They do not always understand that what is happening to them is wrong. At one point, Abdi went to school with black eyes and a swollen forehead. The school principal at Universal School later recalled that day in June 2011. She said his lower forehead was swollen and his eyes were swollen as well. They were blue and purple from bruises. When asked what happened, Abdi refused to say how he got the injuries. Someone should have dug deeper. Someone should have asked more questions. But the moment passed, and Abdi went back home. He would sometimes say things to classmates that were disturbing when you look back on them now. Things like, "I'm going to get killed," or "I'm in big trouble," or "I didn't do well on my homework." But then he would laugh. He had this way of making things unclear. His classmates did not know if he was serious or joking. Children often hide their pain behind humour. They learn to deflect attention away from the bad things happening at home. On April 18th, 2011, almost exactly 1 year before he died, Abdi called 911. He was 9 years old. He told the operator that he was being abused by his stepfather. His words were desperate and clear. "Please come fast," Abdi said into the phone. "It's a matter of life and death." Police responded to that call. They referred the case to Erie County Child Protective Services. But Abdi was not removed from the home. No criminal charges were filed against his stepfather. Instead, the case was referred to an alternative program that the state had started, something called Family Assessment Response. The goal of the program was to help families stay together and avoid removing children from their homes. Abdi made a second call to 911 as well, also reporting abuse. Again, nothing happened that got him out of that house. The system failed Abdi Fattah Mohammed. He did everything a child is supposed to do when they need help. He called 911. He told them he was being abused. He said it was a matter of life and death. And still, 1 year later, he was dead. By April 2012, Abdi was in 5th grade at the International Preparatory School on Clinton Street in Buffalo. It was his first year at that school. His teacher, Tony Poole, said he was bright and loving. He never once failed to complete his homework assignments. His principal, Kevin Eberly, said Abdi had an 86 grade average. He called the boy the star of the school, a great little guy. The school saw no signs that anything was wrong. Abdi did not show visible injuries. He did his work. He was polite and respectful. Whatever was happening to him at home, he kept it hidden from the adults at his new school. Maybe he had learned that asking for help did not work. Maybe he had given up on anyone saving him. On the afternoon of April 17th, 2012, Abdi came home from school around 3 p.m. He changed out of his school uniform. He ate some pasta. His mother was getting ready to leave for her second shift cleaning job at an office building downtown. Before she left, she went to his bedroom to say goodbye. "Bye, Mum," Abdi said. Those were the last words Shukri Bile ever heard from her son. After his mother left for work, something happened between Abdi and his stepfather. According to what prosecutors later argued, it started as a dispute about homework. Neighbours said Mohammed was strict, especially when it came to the children doing their schoolwork. An acquaintance named Tariq Butt recalled Mohammed telling him that he checked the boys' homework every night and that his grades were going down. But the truth is, Abdi's grades were not going down. His teacher said he never failed to complete his homework. His principal said he had an 86 average. Whatever excuse Mohammed later gave for what he did, it did not match reality. This was not discipline. This was something else entirely. At some point that afternoon, Abdi ran. He was running down Sycamore Street around 5 p.m. when a neighbour spotted him. She saw a 10-year-old boy fleeing and a man chasing after him. The neighbour, a woman named Olive Ndaishimiye, stopped her car to help. She helped the wrong person. Ndaishimiye saw that the man chasing Abdi was his stepfather. Mohammed explained that the boy was just trying to get out of doing his homework. The neighbour believed him. She helped Mohammed catch up to the child. She even gave them a ride back to the house on Guilford Street. In the car, the neighbour tried to reassure Abdi. She told him that his daddy promised nothing would happen to him. "No, he always says that," Abdi replied. The boy did not want to go home. When they pulled into the driveway, Abdi kept saying it over and over. "I don't want to go home." He knew what was waiting for him. He knew what his stepfather was capable of. But he was 10 years old, and there was nothing he could do. The neighbour left him there with the man who had been chasing him. "I told the boy, you go home, and if something does happen, you let me know tomorrow morning," the neighbour later told reporters. There would be no tomorrow morning for Abdi Fattah Mohammed. What happened inside that house over the next several hours was almost too brutal to describe. Seasoned homicide detectives and prosecutors, who had spent decades investigating murders, called it one of the worst cases they had ever seen. Mohammed took Abdi down to the basement. According to prosecutors, he first stabbed the boy with a kitchen knife. Then he tried to drown him in the bathroom. Then he brought him to the basement to finish the job. In the basement, Mohammed gagged the 10-year-old boy by stuffing a sock in his mouth and covering it with duct tape. He bound Abdi's hands behind his back with an electrical cord. He tied him to a chair so he could not escape, and then he picked up an 18-inch hardwood baker's rolling pin. Muhammad struck the child nearly 70 times with that rolling pin, devastating blow after devastating blow. Many of the blows were to the head. The force was so severe that it shattered the boy's skull. It separated his head from his spinal column. Medical professionals call this an internal decapitation. The back of his head was crushed so badly that brain tissue was exposed. The Erie County Chief Medical Examiner, Diane R. Vertes, later examined the body and testified at trial. She said the injuries were comparable to falling from a 4-story building onto concrete. She identified 4 separate lethal injuries among damage that covered the boy's entire body. The extensive bruising indicated that Abdi was alive for much of the beating. He felt it. He experienced it. Blow after blow after blow. Abdi was 4 feet 11 inches tall. He weighed just under 100 pounds. He was a little boy tied to a chair with his mouth gagged so he could not scream. And the man who was supposed to be his father beat him to death. When it was over, Muhammad threw a blanket over the body and left the house. He got into his red Subaru Forester and drove away. His plan, apparently, was to go to work. Around 10 p.m, Shukri Bile returned home from her cleaning job. She found her husband and her son both gone. Muhammad had told her before leaving that Abdi had not done his homework and had jumped out of a window. She could not find the boy anywhere. She called the police to report her son missing. Officer Christopher Fields from the Ferry Fillmore district responded to the call. He arrived at 30 Guildford Street around 10:40 p.m. Shukri gave permission for him to search the house. Abdi's stepbrother, Hussein Waris, accompanied the officer. Fields started his search in the basement. When he got down there, he saw blood everywhere. Then he saw feet sticking out from behind a wall. He walked toward them and found the body of Abdi Fattah Muhammad lying in a fetal position, partially hidden under a blanket, his hands still bound with duct tape. Hussein Waris saw the body at the same moment the officer did. "He's dead! He's dead! He killed his own son!" Waris screamed. He was right. Meanwhile, Ali Muhammad had driven to the Buffalo News building where he worked as a security guard. He called his supervisor and asked him to meet him there. The supervisor could tell something was wrong during the phone call, but Muhammad refused to say what it was. They met at the newspaper around 11 p.m. Muhammad confessed to his supervisor. "I have a lot of problems and killed one of my kids," he said. He had come to the newspaper to clean out his work locker, to gather his belongings, as if that mattered anymore. Police officers patrolling the area spotted Muhammad's red Subaru parked near the Buffalo News building. They approached and arrested him. At police headquarters, Muhammad seemed despondent, but cooperated with detectives. He admitted to everything. "I loved my kids," Muhammad told Detective Sergeant James Lonergan. Then he pointed to his forehead and said, "Shoot me here." He tried to explain why he did it. He said the boy had been lying to him all the time. He said it was about discipline. He said Abdi's grades were going down and he was not doing his homework. All of it was a lie. Abdi had an 86 average. His teacher said he never failed to complete his homework. The excuse did not match the facts. The truth is, there was no excuse. There is no explanation that makes sense. There is no reason that justifies what Ali Muhammad did to that child. Buffalo Police Commissioner Daniel Dorenda spoke to the press about the case. He struggled to find words. Every homicide is bad, but it is particularly hard to deal with for first responders, police, and others when it is a 10-year-old child, Dorenda said. In talking to investigators, I was told it was one of the most grisly crime scenes that they can remember, and some have been here 40 years. 40 years of investigating murders in Buffalo, and this was one of the worst any of them had ever seen. The community was devastated. Neighbours on Guildford Street gathered to try to make sense of what had happened. Teachers and students at International Preparatory School were in shock. The Somali community that Muhammad and his family belonged to was horrified. Imam Yahya Omar, chairman of the Imams Council of Western New York, spent the day after the murder consoling the family. He said he had not known about Muhammad's capacity for violence. He had two faces, the Imam said. There was the nice side and the other side that abused this kid. The Imam urged members of the Somali community to stand up against abuse and to report it when they see it. "We want every single kid to say what their problems are, to go to the school teacher, police, even the imam, Omar said. We have the right to stop this kind of evil. But Abdi had tried to report it. He had called 911 twice. He had told other kids. He had said things at school that should have raised alarms, and still, no one saved him. Ali Mohammed Muhammad was charged with second-degree murder. His trial began in October 2012 in Erie County State Supreme Court. Justice Christopher J. Burns presided over the case. Prosecutors Thomas Finnerty and John Ferraletto presented the state's case. Defense attorneys Kevin Spittler and Lana Tupchik represented Muhammad. The trial lasted about 9 days. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had Muhammad's confession. They had the crime scene evidence. They had the testimony of police officers who discovered the body. They had the medical examiner's findings. And they had the heartbreaking testimony of Abdi's own mother. Shukri Billay took the stand on the first day of trial. She sobbed as she described the last time she saw her son alive. She covered her face with her hands and slumped forward in grief as she talked about saying goodbye to him before leaving for work. He told me, "Bye, Mum," she said through tears. When asked to identify her husband in the courtroom, she could barely look at him. "I don't want to see his face, but I see him," she said. The jurors were shown a 12-minute police video of the crime scene. It showed Abdi's bloodied and lifeless body in the blood-splattered basement. They saw crime scene photos of the devastation Muhammad had inflicted on a 10-year-old child. The defendant reportedly looked down during portions of the video. The jurors displayed no visible reactions, but they saw everything. The defense admitted that Muhammad killed the boy. They could not deny it. He had confessed. The evidence was undeniable. Instead, they argued that he did not intend to kill him. Defense attorney Kevin Spittler told the jury that Muhammad was a kind, considerate, patient, understanding, diligent, hard-working, intelligent man. He said Muhammad wished only the best for his sons and believed hard work was how you achieved success. And so how can such a good man, between 5:30 and 9 o'clock at night, on April 17, 2012, act so differently? Spittler asked. He said Muhammad just lost control when the boy tried to run away. Prosecutor Thomas Finnerty was not having it. In his closing argument, he reminded the jury of the nearly 70 separate, distinct blows that Muhammad inflicted on that young and little body. One intentional act after another after another. Intent to cause death? How about intent to slaughter? Finnerty said. He described how Abdi was tied up, gagged, slowly being suffocated, seeing, hearing, feeling his life being taken from him, blow by devastating blow. Finnerty scoffed at the defence's description of Muhammad as a good man. This man took away everything Abdi was and everything Abdi was ever going to be, Finnerty told the jury. It's time for justice for Abdi Fattah. It's time for justice for his family. And it's time to give the defendant what he is due. The judge denied the defence's request to allow the jury to consider a lesser charge of manslaughter. He also denied their request to consider extreme emotional disturbance as a defense. The evidence simply did not support it. On October 18, 2012, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than 3 hours. Some reports say it was only about 45 minutes. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty of second-degree murder. Guilty. Erie County District Attorney Frank Sedita spoke to reporters after the verdict. The evidence was very solid, Sedita said. I think the Buffalo Police Department Homicide Squad conducted an excellent investigation, and I think that Tom Finnerty and John Ferraletto, the two prosecutors on the case, did an incredibly professional job representing the interests of the people of the state of New York, the citizens of this county, and Abdi, the victim. Sedita also made clear that this case transcended any cultural boundaries. When you, so brutally, beat and assault and ultimately murder a child, I think, in any culture, at any time in history, that is the most taboo and criminally sanctioned conduct you could have. Muhammad was sentenced on November 15, 2012. Justice Christopher Burns handed down the maximum sentence allowed by law, 25 years to life in prison. Before sentencing, Muhammad spoke for several minutes. He continued to claim he never meant to kill the boy. I took away a son I loved so much, the former security guard told the court. District Attorney Sedita responded to those remarks bluntly. There's no logical, reasonable explanation for such savage behaviour, Sedita told reporters. There was not. Muhammad appealed his conviction. He argued that the judge should have allowed the jury to consider extreme emotional disturbance as a defense. If they had, the jury might have been able to convict him of the lesser charge of first-degree manslaughter, which carries a shorter prison sentence. The Appellate Division of State Supreme Court rejected his appeal. The judges noted that while the evidence established that the defendant bound and gagged the child before striking him more than 60 times with a rolling pin, his behaviour immediately before and after the killing was inconsistent with the loss of control associated with extreme emotional disturbance. They pointed out that the neighbour who drove Mohammed and Abdi home described the defendant as upset and tired, but not angry. They noted his calculated behaviour after the killing, how he covered the body, left the house, called his supervisor, and went to clean out his work locker. That was not the behaviour of someone who lost control. That was the behaviour of someone who knew exactly what he had done. The conviction stood. Ali Mohammed Mohammed will be in prison until at least 2037, when he will first become eligible for parole. He will be in his late 60s by then. Given the nature of his crime, it is unlikely he will ever be released. In the years after Abdi's death, state lawmakers investigated how his case had been handled by Child Protective Services. They demanded answers about how a child who had called 911 twice to report abuse could end up dead a year later. The state refused to release the full fatality report, citing privacy concerns, but the case led to reforms in how child abuse reports are investigated and tracked. Abdi's principal at International Preparatory School spoke about the tragedy and what he hoped would come from it. "Stop the madness here," Kevin Eberly said. "The madness did not stop. Children are still abused. Children still die at the hands of the people who are supposed to protect them. But Abdi Fattah Mohammed's story reminds us of what can happen when the warning signs are ignored, when a child cries out for help and no one listens. Abdi did everything right. He called 911. He told the operator it was a matter of life and death. He ran when he had the chance. He told the neighbour he did not want to go home. He said his stepfather always made promises he did not keep. But he was 10 years old. He had no power. He had no control. He was completely at the mercy of the adults around him, and those adults failed him. The neighbour who helped Mohammed catch Abdi that afternoon has to live with what happened. She thought she was doing the right thing. She thought she was helping a father bring a runaway child home. She could not have known that she was delivering that child to his death. "I may have been the last person to see that little boy alive," she said. The system failed Abdi Fattah Mohammed. The police responded to his 911 calls, but did not remove him from the home. Child Protective Services investigated, but referred the family to an alternative program instead of taking action. Teachers and principals saw signs but did not connect the dots. Everyone assumed someone else would handle it. No one did. Ali Mohammed Mohammed went from being a trusted guardian to a murderous monster. He was supposed to be Abdi's father. He was supposed to protect him, teach him, guide him, love him. Instead, he gagged him with a sock, tied him to a chair, and beat him to death with a rolling pin. The judge at Mohammed's appeal was right. His behaviour before and after the killing showed that he knew exactly what he was doing. He was not out of control. He was in complete control. He made deliberate choices at every step. He chose to gag the boy so no one would hear him scream. He chose to tie his hands so he could not fight back. He chose to hit him again and again and again, nearly 70 times, until the child was dead. That is not discipline. That is not losing your temper. That is murder. Abdi Fattah Mohammed was 10 years old. He loved watching television and eating hamburgers from McDonald's. He was a good student who never failed to complete his homework. His principal called him the star of the school. His teacher said he was bright and loving. His stepbrother remembered him as a smart, loving and respectful child. He was born in a refugee camp in Uganda to a mother who had fled violence in Somalia. He came to America when he was just a toddler, looking for safety and a better life. For 8 years he lived in Buffalo with his family, and then, on April 17, 2012, his stepfather killed him in the basement of their home. Abdi deserved better. He deserved to grow up. He deserved to become the scientist his stepfather once said he could be. He deserved to graduate from school, to fall in love, to have his own family someday. He deserved a life. Instead, he is forever 10 years old, a face in old news articles, a name on child abuse reports, a victim of the man who was supposed to be his father. Justice Burns sentenced Ali Mohammed Mohammed to 25 years to life in prison. That was the maximum allowed by law for second-degree murder. It means Mohammed will spend at least a quarter of a century behind bars for what he did to that child. But no prison sentence can bring Abdi Fattah Mohammed back. No amount of time can undo the 70 blows from that rolling pin. No punishment can give Abdi the life he was supposed to have. All we can do is remember him. Remember that he was a real person, with a real life, that was stolen from him. Remember that he tried to get help and the system failed him. Remember that somewhere out there right now, another child is in danger. Another child is calling for help. Another child is saying it is a matter of life and death. Maybe this time, someone will listen. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.